All right, today I'm joined by John Eberhart. John is a renowned bow hunter. He is known for hunting mature whitetail bucks on pressured lands and mostly public lands and free walk on private properties. In the really hard state to kill mature bucks consistently in Michigan. He's hunted quite a few other states as well, but has killed a lot of book bucks in Michigan in a really hard place to do so. And he's written extensively about how to do so in many books. He's come out with a new 3-volume set that is just going to be loaded with information. I haven't read it yet, but I've got my copies on order and will do so. The new set's called The Ultimate Guide to DIY Bucks, and it's 3 volumes. You can get it at tethered.com/DIY bucks. We talk about quite a few things. I mean, if you strategies for scouting on pressured lands. I ask him some questions and ask him to walk me through I'll give him a scenario and I ask him to walk me through how he would attack that scenario. We talk about scent control. He is a very avid scent control guy. He takes scent control to the extreme. Although we talk about it in here, it's really not that time consuming. It's really not that hard to get a great scent control regimen. I'm guilty of thinking, that it takes too much time, takes too much of my brain power. I go through too many cycles worrying about scent control. So the last few years, I haven't really taken it that seriously. But John truly believes with activated carbon, you can fool a white-tailed deer's nose. If you have a perfect regimen, you do not have to worry about the wind. So we talk quite extensively about that as well. John will be at Huntstock this year, so we're super excited to bring him to Huntstock. He has not been to a Northeastern hunting show and done seminars ever, maybe outside of Pennsylvania. I don't even know if he's been to a show in Pennsylvania, but he has not come up to the Northeast. So everybody should show up, show out, and let's pack his seminars. He'll have his books there, some copies that you can buy, although I encourage you to buy them beforehand, read them before you get there, and bring your books. He'll sign them for you too. But he will be at Huntstock all 3 days, doing seminars, hanging out, talking deer hunting, talking strategy, and also, and I don't know if I mentioned, it's Huntstock, Massachusetts. So that's August 11th through the 12th. And 2 other big bow hunting guests for Huntstock, Massachusetts. We have Dan Infalt and we have Barry Wenzel. So if you're a bow hunter, this is a show that you can't miss this year. Make sure you come. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing to have all 3 of those guys traveling this far to come and educate everybody on how they attack whitetail hunting. They all hunt differently, too. Barry Wenzel is a traditional archer, shoots recurve. That's the way he's always hunted, and that's how he gets all his kills. He's a great, legendary recurve hunter, and he's just a super fun guy to talk to. Great sense of humor. In an email he sent back to me after we confirmed him, he was like, "Hey Pat, I don't know what the show is like. Let me actually try to pull it up. I don't know what the environment's like at the show, but if it's a place where after hours people are hanging around a campfire and telling deer stories and having fun, I'm all about that." So Barry Wenzel, he'll be there, and also Dan Infalt, who hunts in the beast style that he coined. We have a podcast with Dan coming out here probably next week as well. John Eberhart, Dan Infalt, Barry Wenzel. If you're a bow hunter, you have to come to Huntstock this year. If you've never been to Huntstock before, it's a great time. It's an awesome environment. We're on a farm in the summertime, enjoying the weather. There's, all kinds of great food and drink, great sponsors. Every sponsor is related to hunting in the outdoors. You're not going to have any, booths trying to draw you in and sell you on something you don't want. It's all hunters. It feels like a big deer camp. It's a big party. There's 50 plus seminars that are happening. 3 different locations where the seminars occur. So sometimes there's 3 seminars at once going on. So you can look at the schedule, find something you're interested in, and kind of plan out, what seminars you want to hit. We've got 3D archery course, 20 targets. That is a really fun course to shoot. We'll get you ready for the season. We give away more than $30,000, between $30,000 and $40,000, sometimes a little higher than $40,000 in value, indoor prizes. You can get new optics, bows, guns, arrows, apparel, camo gear, cameras, stands, saddles. I mean, we give away a lot of stuff back to you guys because we appreciate the support you show in coming out to Huntstock. There's a lot of great stuff for kids to do too. All kids under 12 are free, so it's an awesome family event. Bring your family for the day. You'll have a blast. You can go and get your tickets now at www.huntstockevents.com. Tickets are up for sale now. You can also get tickets at the door if you're, last minute planning. You don't know what's going to be happening in the summer. Show up and get your tickets at the door. That's fine. But getting ticket sales in early helps us kind of project how many people are going to show up. Helps us place orders for food, beverage, things like that. So we really appreciate it if you get on and buy your tickets ahead of time, because that does help with the planning. You can get a 3-day pass for $80, or it's 1 day for $40. Fridays, if you want to come on Friday, it's a little bit of a shorter day, but it's an awesome opening day. It's only $30 on Friday. But yeah, we would love to see you guys there. It's going to be one that you absolutely can't miss this year with these 3 guys coming, plus all the trackers and still hunters and legendary Northeastern hunters that we have every single year. They're going to be there too. So if you're into tracking, still hunting, there's going to be seminars and things for everybody. But we made an effort to bring some more big bow hunters to the show this year. So I really hope you guys enjoy it. And I hope you guys enjoy this podcast with legendary bow hunter, John Eberhart. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Suburbia podcast. I'm your host, Pat Guyette. And today I'm joined by John Eberhart. Thanks for coming on, John.
Well, thank you, Pat, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. John will be at Huntstock this year in Massachusetts. Very excited about that. Delivering some seminars. You'll have your books there as well, right?
Yeah, I'll bring some books.
Bring some books.
Glad you reminded me, or I probably would have not thought about it. But yeah.
You've written a lot of books, but so what's this new book that you came out with that there's 3 volumes? I'm sure tons of awesome knowledge. Can you just tell people about what the new book is?
Okay. Yeah, I wrote 3 individual books in the past, and I always had them. They were all published by national publishing companies. So, you send in a manuscript. If they like it, they take on all the expenses of the book design, marketing. You just get a royalty check. So, in those 3 books, I'm still getting royalties from them. And the first one was written in 2003. And they're all instructional bow hunting. They're all bow hunting specific books. So I retired at the end of 2022, and I decided to write one more book, and it was going to be a single book. And I wrote for about 5,000 hours, 18 months it took me to write it. And it's way more detailed and way more information than any of the other 3 books. And it ended up being like 800 pages. So, in a regular 6x9 book, it's usually about 220 pages. So broke it down into 3 volumes, condensed it a tad, put it into 3 volumes. Greg Godfrey with Tethered is a co-author. I wrote the vast majority of the book, however. And yeah, it's volume 1, 2, 3. It's 27 chapters. It covers everything to A to Z on just deer hunting, whitetail hunting in general, no matter where you live, even if you're hunting the Everglades. Greg Godfrey did live in Florida. He hunted the Everglades before. So big timber, we've both hunted in big timber. We've hunted in, I think, together 20 different states. So we've hunted in every terrain feature known, hill country, ag mixed with, timber and swamps, and which is what I'm the most accustomed to. And anyway, 27 chapters, covers literally everything. There's even a recovery there on recovery. recovering deer, hunting access, scent control. There's a pretty big saddle chapter, instructing people how to get into saddle hunting if that's their interest, the advantages of saddle hunting. It's got the 4 segments of the season. In my opinion, the season should be broke down into segments. You got the early season, you got the lull, you got pre and peak rut. They kind of go together, and then post rut and late season kind of go together. And there's chapters on each one of those. Early season, lull, peak, pre-peak, post, and late. There's a chapter on staging areas. There's a chapter on learning how to hunt standing corn, because in the Midwest there's lots of standing corn typically, and most hunters don't know how to hunt standing corn. So I've hunted standing corn successfully for many years. So there's a chapter on hunting standing corn. I covered like 7 or 8 chapters out of 27. So it's very, very in depth and very, very detail oriented.
Awesome. Before we get into the podcast, can you just give everybody kind of a quick overview of your hunting resume, how long you've been hunting, the style of hunting you do, and I don't know how many bucks you've killed, but Michigan public land and walk on private where you've gotten written permission. That's kind of mostly what you do, but just give everybody a quick breakdown of your stats, so to speak.
Okay. I'm 74 years old. I've been bow hunting for 58 seasons, and I did gun hunt up until 1991. I quit gun hunting in 91. Just didn't thrill me anymore, so I quit gun hunting. I have 37 bucks in the Michigan record book, and then I've taken 25 out of state hunts. In either, I would go to better states, obviously, because Michigan pretty much sucks when it comes to taking mature bucks. We're in the 30s. There's there's like 44 states that have whitetails, and we're like in the mid 30s as far as P&Y entries per licensed hunters, because we are the most heavily bow hunted state in the country. So Michigan's tough. I got 37 in the book in Michigan, and I've got 21 book bucks, P&Y bucks from out of state on 25 or 26 trips. I can't remember what it was. I had a state record in Michigan off public land, and those 37 bucks from Michigan came off 21 different properties. So I'm not hunting, some nice managed property and killing, nice bucks every year. I'm here and there and all over the place. And what I think is unique about my resume that nobody in the country can match is I have 100% hunted either public land, free walk-on properties, like out of state. There's lots of free walk-on stuff that's posted,
yep,
or free permission properties. So to have 58 combined book bucks while hunting strictly public and free permission properties or free walk-on properties, I don't, especially in Michigan, as being as pressured it is, I have the most bucks in the record book with a bow. I don't think anybody else can touch that, to be honest with you.
Well, it takes a special breed of hunter to. You must have an unmatched drive. You must be scouting more than anybody else. I mean, it takes a drive to be able to have that level of continued success. I mean, I watch a lot of old Michael Jordan clips. I'm a big sports fan, and there's just something that the greats in anything they have that other people don't have, but the common denominator just seems to be that unmatched drive. You know what I mean? And I feel like you have that.
And one thing, when I look at sports icons, because a lot of people look at TV guys as being experts, okay?
Yep.
The high profile TV guys and a lot of YouTube guys, they look at them as being experts because they kill these monster bucks every year. And one thing I always try to tell people, don't ever look at those guys as experts, because they're not. They're hunting ultra managed properties with no competition. And when you mention sports, that's a perfect lead in for what I have to say. When you look at sports icons, you look at Michael Jordan, you look at Michael Phelps, you look at Tiger Woods, you look at Phil Mickelson, you look at Novak Djokovic, you look at LeBron James, Mickey Mantle, whoever the case may be. Those are icons. So they've not only reached the professional status, they're the icon. And to reach an icon status in a sport, typically you competed in that sport in middle school, then in high school, JV and then varsity. And if you're good enough in high school, you got a scholarship to go to college, and that's a small percentage of the high school standouts that go to college.
Yep.
And then if you're good enough in college and you've outperformed all the other college players in the country, you might get drafted into the pros. And then once you're in the pros, now you're with all guys that have reached pro status, which means they've competed against hundreds, if not thousands, of people in their little pyramid down.
Yeah, they just you keep getting filtered out. They get filtered out. And when you're in the pros, I mean, you've been filtered through everything.
And then once you reach the icon status in the pros, like those guys I just mentioned, that's something. Those guys are true experts at their craft. And what's unique about sports that is not about hunting is when those guys reach the icon status, they've competed against, when they take in all the whole pyramid of all the people they've outperformed down, all the people they've outperformed, they've competed on the same exact playing fields against hundreds, if not millions, of other athletes to reach the icon status. They've competed on the same golf courses, swimming pools, baseball diamonds, football fields, basketball courts, whatever the case may be. And in hunting, the TV guys compete against nobody. And you can't ever, just like you can't measure a sports person's skill set if it's not against competition, you can't compare a guy that's hunting 1,000 acres of ultra managed properties and growing managed bucks and not shooting at them until they're 4.5 years old, so they have no negative consequences with human intrusions or odor or anything like that. They're competing against nobody, so there's no way to measure their skill set. If they had to compete on public land against 30 bow hunters in a section, they wouldn't have a clue what to do.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
So I always like to lay it out. I'm a very honest person, and I've always liked competition. I've gravitated towards competition. Lots of times, I'll go hunting on public land, and I'm sitting in my tree an hour and a half before daylight, and all of a sudden, some guy comes in with a 700 lumen headlamp and spooks every freaking deer within a quarter mile walking through the woods, and they all run past me in the dark, and my hunt's over. So, it's just depressing because on public land, you have no control over anything. And I've got 2 free permission properties that are private that I hunt, but most of my hunting in my past and, current is on public land.
So public land and hunting pressured deer, that's your specialty. Hunting pressured deer on publicly available lands or free permission. Kind of similar to how I hunt, although I'm nowhere near at your level. But yeah, I don't have any private, big private pieces that are exclusive to me. I think right now I have 1 private permission property, and I've never even hunted it because I've gone to. It looked like it was going to be a great spot, and every time I've gone to scout it, and my cameras don't show much there. I'm just waiting for that 1 year where everything lines up on that property to hunt it. But yeah, mostly public land, and in Massachusetts and a lot of the Northeast, John. I don't know if you know, is most private land is available to hunt as long as it isn't posted. So if it's not posted, you can walk on to the property without permission. You still want to get permission if you can, just to let the landowners know you're going to be there. But that's how it is in the Northeast, which is pretty cool. And we were going to do a podcast on Friday. You were under the weather. You're still a little bit under the weather now, I think.
Yes.
But you called me, and I was on the other line with Joe Donito, who is the opposite of you, but you guys have a lot of similar mindsets. But he's a tracker, big woods tracker, only gun hunts, really only goes out when the snow flies. But you guys had a great conversation there about I don't know what was so cool about that was that a lot of times there's different camps in the hunting world where someone's a bow hunter and they talk down on gun hunters, or someone's a gun hunter only and they say, oh, bow hunting is easy. But that wasn't the case on that call. I thought that was super cool.
No, there's lots of different ways to hunt deer. I have mine and he has his. He's hunting the old Benoit way, and it was kind of interesting in that conversation. We went on for 10 or 15 minutes and you never said a word. You were just listening, and it was like,
I
uh,
think it was 45 minutes. Yeah.
yeah, it might have been, but I can remember back in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, Outdoor Life and Field and Stream were the two main magazines at the time. And the Benoits were in Outdoor Life all the time. They hunted up in Maine and, stalked deer with rifles. 30-06s. So I'm very familiar with that. I've got a really good friend that lives in Massachusetts, a bow hunter. So I'm familiar with the fences. If it's not posted, it's open to hunting as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Looking forward to having you at Huntstock. You're going to be around a lot of guys that do like to track, but there's also a lot of bow hunters that come too. So it's going to be a really interesting show. And maybe you and Joe will get on the stage together because you guys hit it off pretty good on that call.
Yeah, and let me interject something there because when you're hunting open big timber, which I know Maine has a lot of, it's very difficult to be successful bow hunting in big timber because there's no destination locations. There's no destination food spot where they come and they feed. So, deer just meander and wander. They have a lot bigger core areas. A buck will have maybe a 5 or 6, 7 mile core area. In ag areas where I hunt, I may be hunting on 10 acres. If I have a piece of private, it may be 10 acres. So I go walk 220 yards and I'm hitting a property line fence and I can't go any farther. So it's a lot more difficult. You have to hunt a lot more strategically on small parcels. But in ag areas, you have destination locations because you have ag fields, you have oaks, you have lost apple trees and stuff. Whereas in big timber, it's very difficult because you just got to hope if you're in an oak tree that in a sea of oaks in the timber, that the deer has to come by the one you're in while you're in it. It's just more difficult because you don't have those very confined destination spots.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about big timber is you can go for miles and miles and never have to worry about a fence typically.
Yeah. Yeah, and in Maine, the destination locations are typically cuts. They do a lot of cutting and logging, so that actually creates great browse. So that's their destinations up there, and they don't have a lot of oaks either. The southern part of Maine has oaks, but the northern part, it's really hard to find an oak tree. But when you do, sure, it's a good spot.
Yeah, what are those cuttings usually? Typically, when they do cuttings, it's probably a minimum of 40 acres, isn't it?
No, they've got some pretty big ones up there. Oh yeah. It's minimum 40 acres, but
Okay, so it's still when you got 40 plus acres of wild cuttings, they've
yeah,
got a lot of options where to feed. So you don't have a small destination spot at a single tree.
right.
Is my
And
point.
and let's talk about you mentioned like hunting a 10-acre piece in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's thousands of 10-acre pieces. And if you are going to get a permission spot in a 10-acre piece, you're not just going to choose a random one. So how are you filtering out like what is on that 10-acre piece that you want to hunt? It goes into the scouting part. Well, I want to talk a lot about scouting and how you scout. What tells you that this 10-acre piece is a great spot to start?
It has to have one of two things. It has to have bedding area. That's my preference. I am a big, big interior bedding area hunter because that's where bucks live during the daylight. That's their home. If I wanted to kill you, Pat, if I wanted to kill you, I'd hide in your house while you're not there at work or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And then if I'm in your house, I've got 100% odds of killing you when you come home at night. Whereas, let's say you've got 3 doors into your house. You got a front, a back door, and a door into the house from the garage. If I staked out at one of your doors, I'd only have a 33% chance because I don't know which door you're going to come in. So I'd have a 33% chance of killing you. And bedding areas are the same thing. Being in the interior of a bedding area where things culminate, more towards the center where the buck's bed is in the deeper part, your odds are a lot higher than hunting a perimeter runway or two feeding into the bedding area because typically bedding areas will have 20, 30, 40 runways coming into it depending on the size of the bedding area. So your odds go down when you're hunting a perimeter edge as opposed to hunting inside of the bedding area, just like my odds go down hunting at a door instead of inside of your house. I like to put everything into perspective of humans so they understand. It's easier to understand that way. So bedding areas would be the first thing I would want. The only other thing would be if I had some, if I, let's say I had a couple of white oaks on the bordering property line, and the bordering property had bedding area. So basically, in a state like Michigan, because we have so much hunting pressure, both gun and bow, 3.5-year-old bucks are very rare. You know, obviously we have people that own lots of land and they manage their property just like TV. That's in every state. So I'm not talking about that type of property where they control everything. But in pressured areas where you may have 30 homesteads in a 640-acre section, and all of those 30 homesteads have people bow hunting on it and gun hunting on it, you know, those are extremely pressured deer. Not many deer live to 3.5 years old, bucks anyway. So everything is security cover oriented in Michigan. They just don't move. Mature bucks here don't move through open timber in daylight hours in the pressured areas. They just do not do that. In fact, there's times where I'll set up at a scrape area. That, you know, a scrape area may be a 10-yard area, somewhat open, and the scrapes are in that open area. And mature bucks during daylight, you know, they'll scrape there at night. You'll get pictures of them at night, but they won't come in and physically work the scrapes because it's a 10-yard opening. You know, they'll come in from downwind and scent check those scrapes from downwind, but they won't physically come into them unless it's after dark to work the scrape. So everything is security cover oriented. So I would want a bedding area on the bordering property, maybe an oak or a lost apple tree right along the tree edge, right along the fence row, on my side of the fence. You know, where a buck might come out in the evening and hop the fence and eat an apple or two because he's got that quick security cover right back across the fence, or possibly on public land. If I'm hunting in something that's somewhat open, but if there's a standing cornfield on the bordering property, because typically in Michigan we don't have public land where they plant crops. It's very, very rare here. And usually most of our public lands are timber or areas that can't be tilled, at least in the Southern Peninsula. That's why it's public land. So I would want something with a crop field on the edge, on the bordering side, where I can sit on the edge in a tree on my side of the fence and hopefully rattle or spar a buck out of the standing corn to the edge and then shoot him. Because I've done very well sparring or rattling bucks out of standing corn, because when the corn gets tall, the bigger bucks bed in the corn because it's awesome security cover. Nobody ever steps foot in them, and they can stand up and eat. So everything's got to be security cover, though. You know, you can have a spot on your property. Let's say you got 2 apple trees, and they're surrounded by autumn olives or some kind of red brush or something. So they've got adequate perimeter security cover around the kill zone, but let's say there's 120 or 150 yards of timber to the east, and then there's a bedding area, and the timber is open timber, so it has no understory. It has no brush or understory security cover. A buck is not going to come out of the bedding area and walk through 150 or 120 yards of vulnerable open timber to get to this feeding location where he does have security cover. They just don't make that vulnerable movement in daylight hours. They just wait till after dark to do it. And obviously at an apple tree, it'd strictly be an evening hunt because you wouldn't hunt it in the mornings because you'd spook a deer with your entry.
So when you're rattling and sparring a buck in, you have to make sure that and let's just use the standing corn analogy. If you're rattling out of standing corn, he has to have security cover the entire way into where you're hunting. You know, you don't want to have that open hardwoods between you because then that rattling won't work, right?
At 100%. Yeah, they would just, as soon as they hit the open spot, if it's a distance from where your sparring sequence is taking place, and I spar more than I rattle. I rarely rattle in Michigan. I do out of state, but not in Michigan. If they come in and let's say it's 70 yards from where they came out of the security cover to the standing corn, let's say you're 70 yards away from the standing corn and it's open between them and where you're making your sparring sequences, they're not going to commit to coming into where you're at unless they see 2 bucks physically moving. Okay, if you did a sparring sequence, they're going to come to the edge of that security cover, and if there's no visual, they're not going to commit to it. So you have to be in some semblance of security cover to have them commit to coming in close enough for a shot with a bow.
So we have a lot of new hunters that listen to the podcast. So can you just explain what you mean and the differences between rattling and a sparring sequence?
Okay, as soon as bucks become hard antlered, so as soon as they shed their velvet, all the bucks in the local herd, the local whatever the core area is, all of the bucks they will start sparring. And it could be a 10-point sparring with a 4-point. And what they're doing when they spar is they just put their antlers together, they wiggle their antlers together, and this is not a fight, it's just a spar. And then they'll push each other for dominance. So they're working out the pecking order, the dominance pecking order of the local buck herd. Okay? And they'll do that as soon as they're hard antlered, which is usually around or very early September for the bigger bucks. And they'll do it right up until pre-rut. And then once pre-rut comes, that's when those start coming into estrus, and then it goes from sparring to fighting. But once you get to that stage, the pecking order of all the bucks in the area has already been established. So unless a buck comes in from outside of the zone, outside of that core zone, which happens all the time, a buck will come in from a different area. There's not a lot of fighting that's going on. Because they've already done that. They've already figured out their pecking order because they've been sparring for a month and a half. But once a pre-rut comes and those start coming into estrus, and it's a fight for breeding rights, yeah, two big bucks might fight. But in Michigan, probably one unique thing where I'm hunting is there's so few mature bucks, and sometimes there's none. I've hunted 3 years in a row in Michigan all season without seeing a buck I would shoot or have one I'd shoot on camera. There's so few mature bucks that, if when they cross the path of an estrus doe that's with another buck, they just, as soon as they catch up to them, they just take her over. Our 3.5-year-old buck to other deer in the area is 40 or 50 to 1. So when I say, what I mean by that is there's probably one 3.5-year-old or older buck for every 40 or 50 other deer in that area, which means does, fawns, 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks. That's how out of skewed the mature bucks are. It's not like TV Fantasyland zoo property where a guy sits in a box blind of a picked cornfield and 8 bucks walk into the field and 3 of them are shooters. That does not exist. And deer here, big bucks here, our mature bucks don't walk into exposed crop fields. They don't walk into hay fields, alfalfa fields, soybean fields, and picked cornfields in the daylight. They just don't do that. Unless they're with a hot doe. If they're with a hot doe, they might.
So when you're doing a sparring sequence, since there's a lot of ground noise when two bucks are really sparring, do you do anything to make ground noise while you're doing your sequence, or are you just hitting your antlers together?
Well, because I'm in the tree, I can't do a ground noise. If I have leaves in the tree that I could grab a branch and shake if they're dry leaves, yeah, I might do that a little bit, but typically it's just a sparring sequence. And I guess I didn't really answer your question on the sparring and rattling. Sparring is I use a rattle bag. I do not use antlers. I used antlers for years, but they get in my way. Rattle bag works better, way better in my opinion, if you got the right rattle bag. But anyway, where was I going with this? What was your question?
Sparring sequence versus a rattling sequence. Yep.
When you get 74, you get memory loss. So a sparring sequence is you take your bag and you just make an initial clash, and you may wiggle the sticks around for 10 seconds. Click, 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 click. And then you may be quiet for 10 or 15 seconds. And then you'll click it together again for maybe 5 seconds. And then you'll be quiet for 7 or 8 seconds. Then you'll smash it again a little bit louder and then for 5 or 10 seconds, and then stop and be quiet for another 10 or 15 seconds, and then do it again and then stop. So it's a lot more subtle. It's not aggressive. Like you watch these TV guys, they just take antlers and smash them together, constant noise. Deer don't do that. That is not how deer, even when they're physically fighting, they're not just constantly banging their antlers. They're getting them together and they make a smashing noise when they initially clash, and then they're pushing each other for dominance. And there's not a lot of noises during that pushing phase. So sparring is much more subtle, and you're much more apt, when you're hunting the early season through the lull, to get a response from a sparring sequence because it's subtle and it's it's more of a social thing. Sparring is more of a social thing. I've had 4 bucks standing together, and they would take turns sparring with each other, and nothing aggressive. Like I said, I've seen 10 point sparring with 4 points, and whatever. And you'd never see a 10 point during breeding season spar with a 4 point. 4 point would want nothing to do with him because he might get gored in the side or something.
Mm-hmm.
So rattling, all out rattling, like if I go to Kansas or Iowa during peak rut or post rut, then you can be real aggressive because out there's lots of mature bucks. Not quite like you see on TV, but there's a lot of mature bucks, and they're used to hearing 2 big antlers bashing each other. And because there's so many big bucks, the rut is a lot more competitive. The breeding rights is a lot more competitive, so you can be far more aggressive where there's more mature dominant bucks.
So for beginners out there, you don't want to be doing a sparring sequence during the peak rut because it's going to sound odd to the bucks in the area, correct?
Correct. In Michigan, you could very easily still during the rut get something to come into a sparring sequence just out of curiosity. But yeah, you need to be a little bit more aggressive once you get into late October and into early November and November during the physical rut phases.
Let's go back to what you were talking about in hunting, kind of deep into the bedding area, more into the center of it where you're going to have better odds, as opposed to hunting the edge where there might be 30 different entrance points into that bedding area. What's the risk reward there? If you're getting into the center of the bedding area, your odds.
You have to hunt bedding areas very strategically. Okay, you never hunt a bedding area prior to the rut phases. And the reason I'm looking at the side, I'm looking at your picture here, so I'm not looking at the center of my camera here. You don't hunt interiors of bedding areas until the rut phases. So I do all my scouting, like right now, March and April, as soon as the snow melts where I'm at. And I go in bedding areas because it doesn't bother me to spook deer, run them all out of there. I'm 6 months ahead of the season. So they're going to be all back in there and everything is going to be hunky-dory, by rut phases. So this is the time of year I go in the bedding areas, I pick out locations, prep trees to the best of my ability, mark them on Onyx, and then I don't step foot back in that spot until I've got my bow in my hand during pre-rut or peak rut. Okay? And you have to, this is an absolute must, you have to commit to an all-day sit. So you've got to be in the bedding area 2 hours before daylight, in your tree, settled in an hour and a half before daylight and quiet. Because typically in a pressured area, mature bucks are going to be entering back into their bedding areas about anywhere from 10 minutes to a half an hour to 40 minutes before daylight. They're coming back in the dark because they're not going to be out in the vulnerable areas. They want to get back in the security cover before it gets daylight. And so you're in there and settled in, so you're not spooking them with a typical 20-minute before daylight morning entry. You're in the tree settled in. And now those bucks are going to be in there all day. Pre-rut, they're going to be, during the rut phases, they're going to be in there searching for does or whatever during the middle of the day and in the mornings and in the evenings. They're going to search check the perimeters of the bedding areas probably in the middle of the day to see what has came into the bedding area in the morning, doe-wise. And you're in there. And you have to stay until like a half an hour after dark. And the reason you have to stay till after dark is you want to give the bucks, if there is a mature buck in the bedding area, you want to give him time to leave the bedding area before you exit. So you're not making any kind of an intrusion to spook him with your morning entry or with your evening exit, because you're leaving well after he's left the bedding area. You're in the bedding area well before they come in. And that's where they do their breeding during the peak rut. They will physically force does into the bedding areas, and they breed them, and they may breed a doe, 15 times, 20 times a day. So every time they breed a doe, they'll breed her, and then she may lay down, and then they'll bed down 5 to 10 yards downwind of her, and then 20 minutes later, they'll get up and walk over and nudge her, and she'll get up and maybe run 10, 20, 30, 40 yards, and then he'll breed her again, and they'll do the same thing, and they do that all day long. So they're moving around in there. Other bucks are also in there, checking for does as well. And anything can happen at any time of day at the interior bedding area. So they have to be strategically hunted on all-day sits during the rut phases only. And another key ingredient here, and this little, I don't know why people fight this so much because it's a super simple thing. Scent control is of utmost importance. I never pay attention to the wind direction. When you're hunting in an interior or bedding area on an all-day sit, 50% of the deer you see on average are going to be downwind of you. So you better have a good scent control because as soon as you get blown, your location's compromised. So I'm a big activated carbon fan. I haven't paid attention to the wind since 1997. I never get winded. And to give you a stat, from 1965 when I started hunting until 1996, I shot 8 bucks with my bow. Okay, while I was 100% playing the wind, using milkweed, all that neat archaic stuff. And then from 1997 through 2024, I've shot 49 bucks using scent lock. So in 33 years, I shot 8, and in 27 or 28 years, I shot 49 using scent lock. It's the biggest game changer there is in bow hunting or deer hunting in general, because when you can disregard wind and you can beat their nose, which is their biggest defense, it's a game changer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think most people, are going to hunt the outskirts of the bedding area, looking at one or two of those trails going into it because they're afraid of getting into the middle and blowing up the entire bedding area. So it's to them, it's they're hedging their bets. It's not as aggressive and not as, likely they're going to blow the whole thing up. So that's what I was going to ask you is can you hunt that same stand location multiple days in a row once you get to the middle? But I guess if your scent control is so solid as yours is, then you probably can, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's actually advantageous to do that, especially during peak rut, because peak rut, let's say you have a mature buck in your area and through season that's his bedding area. He's bedding in that particular bedding area. Okay, you go in there and hunt it the first time, and he's not in there. Okay, you don't even see him at a distance, because that's another thing in a bedding area during the rut phases. The foliage is down. You've got a pretty big visual. Even though you've got heavy security cover, you still have a big visual because you're in a tree. So if he may be with another doe in a different bedding area, he may have pushed a doe into a different bedding area within his core area, or he may have at night found a doe that overlaps into his core area and picked up on her, and she pulled him into her core area. And so he's in a totally different bedding area, breeding her outside of his core areas. So if you go in and hunt that a single day and he's not there, he may be there the next day when he's done with breeding her in her estrus cycle and he comes back home. And that's the same with any spot, even if you're hunting a mast tree, an oak tree, or whatever the chestnuts, whatever the preferred mast is in your area, during the rut phases, and it's still dropping food. Don't be afraid to hunt it multiple times during the rut, because the buck you're after may be in doe lockdown with a doe someplace, and he has no reason to be there, because you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, if he's with the doe lockdown with a doe, he's not going to be over eating at this food source. He's breeding this doe 100% of the time during her 28 to 32 hour cycle.
He's not going to be back home. He's going to be going to check out all the local bars for the other does. You know what I mean? He might go back to her place instead of go back home.
So it's good if you've got a really good location and you're getting steady doe traffic at it during the rut phases at a feeding location or a primary scrape area, which is usually set up at some kind of a doe destination location, is where primary scrapes always are. Don't be afraid to hunt it multiple times in a row, because the buck may be in lockdown your first one or two sits. And again, when you're hunting a spot like that, because it's typically going to be where there's a lot of doe traffic, you better have a good scent control regimen, because you're leaving odor on the ground and you're spooking deer that maybe while you're there or after you leave, because you're leaving residual human odor on the ground that they can smell when they come in after dark. So, that's one thing. People that don't have a good scent control regimen, typically if they're hunting a place where they're seeing a lot of deer, those deer numbers typically decline day after day because they're leaving human odor, and the deer don't come in until after dark. That's very common. It happened to me all the time when I was hunting the wind. If I hunted a location 3 or 4 times in a row, well, I rarely hunted it 4 in a row, but 3 in a row, usually the deer numbers would decline each set.
So your answer on scent control for garments is obviously scent lock, but what are you doing with scent control wise with your boots to make sure when you're walking out of that deep bedding area, the center of it at night, what are you doing with your boots to make sure that you're not leaving scent on the ground?
Okay, let me clear one thing up. It's scent lock or scent blocker. They both use activated carbon. Scent lock owns scent blocker now. And the only reason people nix scent lock, and the only reason I say scent lock, I have no allegiance to scent lock. The only factor that makes me have what allegiance I do have to scent lock is they own the patent on using activated carbon. Nobody else can use activated carbon unless they give them permission and they pay scent lock a royalty.
Yep.
So all the other hunting companies or their pro staffers knock activated carbon because they can't use it. And they don't want to pay the hefty royalty to use it. So scent lock has this word scent lock has nothing to do with it for me. It's the fact that they have activated carbon and treated carbon and zeolite. I forgot your question.
There's no activated carbon boots. So what are you using boot wise, and what are you doing on your boots to make sure that there's zero?
I do nothing. I use either like muck boots or dry shod or rubber boots. I got old Red Ball boots. I've got old Rocky boots. I probably got 30 pair of hunting boots for different weather conditions, pack boots, and I do nothing to them. They're airtight. There's no water can get in them. No air can get out of them. So and I don't do anything to them. I don't treat them. I never use sprays. I used to rep for dead downwind. I don't use sprays on my clothing or anything. You never put sprays over scent lock clothing. And if you do ever use activated carbon clothing, the key thing is learning how to properly care for it, store it, and use it. It's not just a magic bullet. You put it on and you're never going to get winded. You got to know how to use it in conjunction with other things, gear that you hunt with. But as far as boots, I don't do anything. I've got in the back of my soccer mom minivan that I hunt from, I've got a big otter ice sled, and I've got my deer card in that, and my boots are just laying loosely in there. I do absolutely nothing to treat my boots. I do if I buy a new pair of boots. I'll usually set them up in my garage, take them out of the box, and put them up in the garage for a couple of years before I use them to let them air out. Because especially rubber boots, good rubber boots, they have a really strong rubber odor, and you're never going to get that rubber odor out. And it is a foreign odor to a deer, so when they cross your path, they may smell it, but it's not a spooky odor to them. So they will smell it and may sniff your trail for a few yards, but then they just go on about their business. But other than that, like all my other stuff, my sticks, I wipe my sticks down, my climbing sticks down with scent-free wipes. I just buy Pampers or Huggies, hypoallergenic baby wipes. I don't buy the expensive stuff in the sporting goods stores that's overpriced. And I wipe my sticks down with that. And the aiders, I wash the aiders in scent-free detergent. I usually use Arm & Hammer hypoallergenic detergent you can buy in a grocery store for like $8 a gallon. And I wash all my undergarments and layering garments in the same, scent-free detergent. If I when I wore a wristband, I had to wash that. Anything that's fabric that's going to be exposed during the hunt, you want to try and keep it as clean as possible. And you have to wear the head cover with the scent lock. That 40% of your odor comes out of your hair follicles, your beard follicles, and so your head's a big deal. The TV guys that they used to sponsor, the scent lock used to sponsor, they just wear a jacket and pants and a pair of gloves, and they'd wear a logo hat like you do, one of their sponsors' logo hats, and their face and their hair is hanging down and their beards are exposed. And they're hunting zoo deer, so it doesn't matter. those deer don't get hunted and killed until they're 4.5 or 5.5 years old. So they accept a lot of human odor and a lot of things that you can't get away with in the real world of deer hunting. So you can't replicate what the TV guys do in almost any situation.
At least with your boots, though, you probably it's in the back of your truck, and you get to the parking lot. You're not putting it on until you're in the woods or off the pavement, or do you? How crazy are you getting with when you're putting your boots on, taking them off? Are you?
When I park my vehicle, I'm in my street clothes just like I am right now. I just swing behind the seats because all the seats are out of the back of my van. It's just like a little mini hotel room.
Yep.
And I've got my totes there. I've got one tote that's got my Stuntlock clothing in it. I've got another tote with my Stuntlock backpack in it. I've got another tote that's got all my layering garments and another tote that's got all my rain gear. So I just step back there and take off my street clothes and put on my hunting clothes. I'm typically out of the car within 5 minutes. If you and I drove to a spot and you're in your street clothes, okay, and you have to put on your hunting clothes, and I park behind you, I 100% guarantee I will be out of my van well before you're ready to go in the woods. That's a 100% guarantee. Everything is laid out just so nice. You just this, put it on, and then put my boots on last and step out the side door and done.
Yeah, you've got an awesome video. I think it's on your YouTube channel of your van and how you have everything set up and compartmentalized and everything. Is that on your YouTube channel? I
Yeah,
saw it on YouTube. Yeah.
it's on
Um,
mine, and I think Tethered G2 Outdoors has a YouTube. They got like 500,000 views on that.
yeah.
My soccer mom, they call it something. I don't remember what they called it.
Yeah. It's an awesome video. Just shows how prepared you are for everything. All right. Let's talk scouting real quick.
Mhm.
When do you scout? Where do you scout? If you're gonna look for a new hunting place, not the places that you already know, you're gonna go look for a new hunting spot. When when are you gonna go there, and what are you looking for before you even get to the location? Do you do any e-scouting, anything
Oh yeah.
online first? All right, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. If I were going to go look at a new piece of public land, yeah, I would pull it up on my computer. I mean, I have Onyx, but you just don't get the clarity on a phone that you get on your computer screen. It's bigger. So I'll pull it up and I'll mark, I'll mark spots that look interesting, funnels, pinch points between timber or areas, swamps where you can obviously see there's a swamp or stands of pines or, and if there's a stand of pine when that always interests me because when I get there, it's a stand of just like white pines or red pines, they're worthless because they're all open underneath. But if it's a stand of like spruce trees, that's a bedding area because spruce trees go all the way to the ground. So that's going to be really dense. You're going to bed in that. So yeah, I scrutinize aerials, but unlike TV where you can look at obvious pinch points and obvious places where deer are going to go, points going out into a crop field or whatever, where you got security cover going out into a crop field. Um, when you're hunting public land, you don't know what anything's going to be like until you go out there on foot. On TV, they can look at aerials and pick spots and go there because it's pristine. Nobody else is hunting any place around where they're at because they own it. It's big, huge chunks of land. So I mark stuff and I check spots out that look interesting, but until you're on foot, you can't tell. There may be two tree stands within 50 yards of somebody else's hunting it. So, and then there's lots of times I will physically go to a public land on foot and it doesn't have the adequate security cover from, in my opinion, for it to have good mature buck movements during daylight hours. Not to say it can't hold a mature buck, but if it doesn't have the bedding area and the transition security cover required to go from a bedding area to let's say an oak tree or some kind of a feeding location, a chestnut tree, if it doesn't have the adequate transition security cover to it, a buck is not going to feed there during daylight hours, a big buck. Okay. So everything has to have security cover. Not only just the bedding area, the location has to have security cover around the kill zone, and it has to have adequate transition security cover to a known bedding area for it to have a buck there in the morning or in the evening. Because in the morning, he's not going to stop at this spot and then go through 100 or whatever yards of open timber to the bedding area. He's not going to be vulnerable during that transition. and he's not going to do the same thing in the evening. It has to have transition security cover where they may walk the edge of it, and they've got a quick one hop exit into the security cover.
So
So I'm
you'll be
also let me back up a little bit because I'm also when I look for food. So I'm looking for rut phase locations, which is going to typically be in bedding areas. And I'm also for early season locations, I'm looking for mast and fruit trees. But again, when I find mast and fruit trees, they have to have the adequate transition cover to a known bedding area. A lot of times when I'm looking at a new piece of public land and when I'm looking at the aerial, I also scrutinize the bordering properties. So if I see there's a crop field on the edge, I'll go over on the public side and walk that edge where there's a crop field, and I may very well prep a tree not knowing what that crop field is in on the edge. But if it's in standing corn, that's a tree that if it is in standing corn that fall, I would definitely go in there and do a rattle sequence and try and pull a buck out of that standing corn, pull it across the fence to that location.
so would you, if we back up a little bit, and the first thing you're going to do when you're scouting a new location, are you looking at public, pulling out Onyx or something like that and looking at where the public land is and checking all of those first and dropping pins in interesting looking public locations? Or how what's your first step there when you're like, all right, here's where I'm going to narrow down? Like for me in Massachusetts, you would be looking for a big public piece or a private piece that's next to, a sanctuary or somewhere where there's deer, more mature bucks than the average piece of land is. So I have certain things that I would do to hone in on a piece. What is it that you're doing before you drop your pin location to go check it out?
Well, it's always nice if you have something bordering something where there's no hunting, but that's that's kind of an anomaly here. We don't have a lot of that, no hunting grounds. Uh, what am I looking for before I drop a pin? Okay, let's say there's a bedding area here and there's a bedding area here, and there's open timber between it, but there's an area of, let's say there's a creek running between those two bedding areas, okay? Because a lot of times bedding areas have water in them here. We a lot of low-lying swamps in Michigan, low-lying state, and so that creek is going to have brush along the side of it because it's more moisture and the vegetation grows taller. So I'm going to be looking at that big time because that's going to be a transition zone from bedding area to bedding area. But primarily, what I'm looking at on public land, my main goal on public land is to be back in the bedding areas. I focus a lot of my attention during the rut in interiors of bedding areas.
So you are filtering out private spots when you're dropping these pins, because what I was trying to get at
I
is,
don't understand what you mean by filtering out private spots.
well, what I was trying to get at is, like, let's say those two places you're talking about, we were just talking about here, and you got a creek running through the middle of it. If those were private pieces, then you'd have to go get permission before you even scouted it. But I'm sure that you're just looking at public land first if you're going to throw a random pin and spend time to go out there.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, in Michigan, it is so hard to get, to knock on a door anymore and get private hunting permission. So, do I pull up aerials and look for, like on Onyx? Do I pull up Onyx and then, because it shows all the property lines and stuff, and then look for places to go knock on somebody's door? I haven't done that in a few years. I used to do that all the time, not using Onyx, but aerials on the computer because Onyx didn't exist back then. But permission used to be a little bit easier to get. Now everybody's into, don't let anybody on your property. Don't cross don't cross your 10 onto my 20. I've got two pieces of private now. One of them is 35. The other one is 37 acres of huntable land. Those are the only two privates I have. And so everything else is public. And so typically in Michigan, when I'm looking at something, I'm looking at new public lands to hunt down,
Okay.
particularly downstate, because I've scouted everything within probably 50 miles of my house. And Michigan has a ton of public land. And southern Michigan is all ag. So southern Michigan is where I like to go because it has richer soil. They grow bigger antlers per the same age group. Up here in the northern Michigan, we have sandy soil, and you can kill a 4-year-old deer that's not 100 inches. So, down there, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old is going to typically be in the 125s or bigger. So I gravitate to southern Michigan when I'm looking for new public lands. But the only negative of that is Zone 3, which is southern part of the lower peninsula. That's Flint's in there, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Battle Creek, Lansing. At least 2/3 of our state's population live in Zone 3. So the public lands that are down there just get pounded. I mean, you can walk through a 10-acre woodlot and there'll be 10 or 15 stands hanging, wood. And yeah. And that doesn't include the people that walk in and set up and then take their stuff down when they leave. So there's a lot of pressure. But one thing I always do, I definitely should have brought this up in Michigan. For me to physically hunt a piece of public land in Michigan, I have to cross some semblance of water, a creek or a river with waders or hip boots, or use a canoe or a boat. Because in Michigan, if I can walk to any location on public land with my knee-high rubber boots, it's going to be worthless because other people are going to be hunting near it and screw it up. So I have to try and access areas other hunters, a lot fewer hunters are going to access because it requires more work. So I try to pretend when I'm walking through the woods and I'm physically scouting on foot, which is what I really like to do. I pretend everybody in this area is trying to kill me. Where are the only places on this property I may get up and move during daylight hours? If I can't find any of those types of places on that public land, that's why I gravitate to bedding areas. I'm not going to set up anything. You can have all the sign in the world. You could come to a grove of oaks and it's got 30 scrapes in it, and there's 50. I'm being facetious here, obviously. And 50 rubs in the area,
Yeah.
And it's just trashed with sign. It doesn't make any difference. If any of that sign is made by a mature buck, it's made in the security of darkness. So, having all the sign in the world is meaningless if it's not something that a mature buck would visit during daylight hours. And just because the sign's there doesn't mean it's used in the daytime. Yeah, a 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks may visit it in the daylight, but not a buck I want to kill.
So let's kind of rephrase the question a little bit. I want to give you something to think about. Let's say that you were going to come to hunt Massachusetts. All right. Let's say you were going to come hunt Massachusetts this year, and you never scouted it, never hunted here, but you're coming to try to kill a mature buck the first week of the season, opening week. What would your strategy be if you weren't able to come and do a pre-scouting trip or anything? It's you show up. Maybe you could show up a day or two before the season, but you're coming to Massachusetts. Walk me through what you would do to get yourself in the best position to kill a mature buck here.
Okay, if I were on public, obviously it'd be public land.
Yep.
So I'm going to if I'm going to go someplace out of state, it's going to be a minimum of 7 to 10 day hunt. I like to do a 10-day hunt instead of 7, so I don't feel pressured on time. And what I typically would do is I would scout totally clad in 100% in scent lock, because Massachusetts has a lot of hunting pressure. I'd totally be clad in scent lock, and I would scout my first 2 days. I wouldn't even have my bow in my hand. I would scout onyx locations, prep locations, whatever the case may be. And if it's early season, obviously it's going to be around food sources. So I'd have to see if there's oaks in the area. I think Massachusetts has oaks.
Yeah, a lot of oaks.
A lot of oaks. I'd look for white oaks, because white oaks are preferred over red oaks because they have less tannins in their acorns. And then I would, according to what food sources I would find. You guys have chestnuts?
Yeah, some, not a lot.
Not a lot. You probably don't have much for apple trees.
Those are few and far between too.
Okay, Michigan has a lot of public land that used to be pastures, by farmers. So cows used to eat apples and shit out apples. So there's apple trees kind of scattered around in a lot of places on public lands here. But anyway, I would research whatever the preferred food sources are in Massachusetts, and I would look for those. And what day is your opener?
It's usually, well, it's the first week of October.
Okay.
It changes every year, but it's between the 5th and the 8th of October.
Okay, so let's say your opener was on the the 5th. Okay, so I would begin hunting on the 5th. That would be opening day of physical hunting. I'd be there a couple days beforehand. I would scout in my scent lock, and that's actually cool because that means the mature bucks are typically rubbed out by September 5th. So they've had 30 days to lay sign as far as rubs are concerned, and scrapes they can do even in August. So I'm going to look for food sources, and when I find a food source, I find little grove of oaks or one oak tree or whatever the case may be, I'm going to look at the sign around it because obviously, if it's dropping a preferred food source, because Massachusetts I don't think has a lot of ag, right?
Not a ton. There's decent amount of ag though, but you typically are getting big blocks of wood,
Okay.
where maybe the perimeters will have some ag.
Okay, let's pretend I'm in something there's no ag for miles. Okay, so I'm looking for the food sources, and when I find the food sources, I obviously have to make sure, okay, this white's it's been dropping, which by October it definitely would be dropping, and I'm looking at the buck sign around it. So if the buck sign around it, if it's tall rubs, then I know it's an older buck because as bucks age, they get taller and their antlers grow higher off their heads, so their rubs are higher up the tree. Typically, if it's getting a lot of doe traffic, there's probably going to be a scrape around it. There's probably going to be a scrape or two in that vicinity. So, and then I will mentally log those. I'll mark it on Onyx, and then I'll mentally log, okay, that had that kind of sign. And then for 2 days, I'll just totally scout the third and the fourth. And
Will
then,
you use cameras at all
um,
if you find a spot
If,
like that?
if it had cell service there, I would. I wouldn't use a SD card where I have to physically visit it. But if it
Hmm.
had cell coverage there, I would imagine Massachusetts has cell coverage everywhere, don't they?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, because when we go out of state when I go out of state with my boys, we always use cell cameras. So yeah, I would put a cell camera on it because Massachusetts is a pressured state, I would treat it like I would Michigan. So I'd carry a stick with me with two-step aiders, and I'd put the camera at least 12 feet up the tree so it's not in eye level, so it's out of their peripheral vision, so they don't see it and spook. So yeah, I would use cameras. I'd probably carry a couple in my backpack, and I would prep the location the best I could, and then mark it on Onyx, and then I'd go look for another one. And I probably would be able to find 5 or 6 different locations in 2 days. And because I was wearing scent lock, I was leaving as little odor, and intrusion impact as possible. And then I would hunt the locations according to the sign. Whichever one looked like it had the best sign and the best security cover and the best transition security cover to it, that's what I would hunt. I seriously doubt that I would scout in a bedding area because I'd be spooking deer with my entry in the daytime into a bedding area. So I think that would be counterproductive. I would just be looking for food sources or transition corridors from a bedding area to a food source that had the adequate security cover.
An interesting thing about Massachusetts, and I don't know if this would change your scouting at all, but it's it depends on where you are in Massachusetts, whether there's a lot of pressure. The closer you get to Boston,
Yeah,
where there's more population of people and more deer and less land to hunt, those areas are very pressured.
yeah.
You
That's
know,
same way, that's same as here. Yeah.
but the area you're describing, a big block of woods that wouldn't have ag around it, that you would probably have the woods pretty much to yourself early season. There's and during bow season, a lot of guys out in western Massachusetts
Whoa.
are gun hunters, and they only hunt for gun during gun season, which isn't until the end of November. So we get basically 2 months of only bow season, and in those bigger woods, you might have 200, 300 acres all to yourself. Let's say it's
Wow.
a let's say it's a 2,000 acre block of woods. There might be 4 or 5 guys in that whole 2,000 acre block that would be hunting that first week of bow season.
Wow. When you're in Michigan, you got about 30 bow hunters and trees for every 640 acres
Yep.
on opening day.
Yep.
So,
It's unique.
but still, you have a lot of gun hunting pressure. So I'm still hunting in Massachusetts a very pressured deer.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm still going to treat it similar to the way I would do it in Michigan. Like when I go out to Kansas and Iowa and Illinois to hunt, I drop my guard big time because those deer are pretty stupid. They're pretty easy to kill. Massachusetts, I know, is a hard to hunt state. So I would treat it the same as I would Michigan with caution. I would do everything cautiously and try not to make any more of a human impact as possible because I know mature bucks, they've been left alone since deer season, maybe other than a little bit of spring turkey hunting. Nobody's been in the woods. And to a big buck, as soon as there's an influx of human activity in the woods, they know what that means. They've lived through two or three gun seasons. So they know when there's an influx of human activity in the fall, it's time to change my routine and get back into the bedding areas. Okay, they don't know I'm scouting. They think I'm a threat to their existence. So I still want to make as little impact as possible. I'm still going to definitely hunt food because early season everything revolves around bedding area to feeding area, and a lot of times in the early season, bucks aren't back deep into the bedding area yet. There hasn't been enough pressure to push them back in there. So they're bedding out in the peripheral areas. They may be bedding in ferns in the woods, tall ferns. So I'm just going to be hunting food sources or travel corridors between known bedding areas to food sources. And yeah, I would definitely put up cameras. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I would definitely have done that, whether you brought it up or not. That I didn't. You brought it up, so I had to admit to it. Um, yeah, and then I would probably hunt my cameras
Yeah.
because if the camera was actually at the food source, that's what we do in Kansas. We spent 3 days last year scouting before we even picked up our bows. And we had 12 locations. We had a camera at every single location, all cell cameras. And we strictly hunted our cameras. And that's what we've done for years. I don't do that in Michigan. I don't typically put cameras at my locations in Michigan very often.
Let's ask the same question. If you were to come to Massachusetts for a week with the goal to kill a mature buck, but you're going to be hunting November 14th through the 24th,
November
what would
14th through the 24th. Okay.
all right? That's typically when they're
Correct.
the peak rut is here. What would your how would your scouting strategy and your whole game plan change during that week?
When is your gun season?
Gun season is like end of November, beginning of December. Varies in the dates, but it's usually around November 28th to December 1st is when it starts.
It would probably be the same because I am as much of an interior bedding area guy I am. It would depend on how big the bedding areas are in your area. If you had monstrous bedding areas, like hundreds of acres, which we have a lot of that,
Mm-hmm.
then I may go in and set up something in a bedding area. Okay, a spot or two in a bedding area where am I wearing my scent lock before I start hunting. But typically, I would probably still be looking for food-based trees, mass trees, and actually that would actually consolidate it a little bit because I would assume a lot of the mass trees or whatever the preferred food source is would be gone by that time. Okay, they would have dropped their food and it would have been consumed. So whatever I find as far as something that's still dropping food, it's going to be more concentrated traffic because they have less options to go to. So I'm still going to be looking for food sources, transition routes between bedding to feeding because that's where the does are still going to be feeding at those locations. Obviously, the bucks during the rut phases are pursuing those does. So as long as you're at a heavy doe location, your odds of seeing a good mature buck that's not with a doe and he's in the searching mode, even during peak rut, he's between does. He's gonna scent check around and he's gonna scent check doe activity spots. But I would probably, I don't know if I would. I should probably rephrase that a little bit on the bedding areas because I'd probably take my sticks and if I'm going to go into a bedding area, I would probably go in gray light in the morning, early gray light, and just cold turkey on a DIY thing and just walk in and just slowly go in and find a spot with some good sign or a lot of crossing runways, convergence of runways, or possibly even in bedding areas, there's going to be food sources. There may be oaks or whatever the case may be in bedding areas, beech nuts, chestnuts, whatever. And, if I find a location that has adequate sign, I'd set up on that. Because as long as it's got doe sign at it, the odds of a mature buck coming by it during the daylight hours, as long as the security cover requirements are right, is pretty damn high. Because that's what they're doing. They're looking for does. And if they're already doed up, I'm not going to get an opportunity to hit them anyway.
Yeah, and that time of year too is with two young kids, I drop my kids off at school in the morning, so I lose a lot of sunrises during the rut and during the season in general. But so I've been hunting a lot the last few years, getting into my stand at 8:30, maybe 9 o'clock, and seeing a ton of activity, from 8:30 until 11. So I mean, going in gray light, that's gonna give you a better odds of not bumping a deer on the way into that bedding area, but you're also going to be set up for all that midday movement.
Midday movement is a big, big deal. To give you a stat, this is an interesting stat. From November, our gun season opens November 15th. So from November 1 through November 14th, I've shot 20 bucks in Michigan. 20 bucks during that 14-day time frame. 7 of those bucks were between the hours of 11 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's 35%.
Mm-hmm.
While less than 8% of my time spent on stand during those years was during 11 to 3. Wow. So usually I'm hunting just mornings or evenings. So that's a 35% kill rate on an 8% on-time stand, from 11 to 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
so midday is a big deal, but you've got what most hunters don't understand. You've got to be in the adequate spot. You've got to be in areas where there's security cover. If you're sitting in open timber and expect to see a mature buck during the day, it ain't going to happen. You've got to be back in the bedding areas or transition corridors, secure transition corridors between bedding areas. You've got to be in the right types of locations, or you're not going to ever see that activity.
So what if that 8%? What if you spent 100% of your time between those hours? I wonder what that 35% number would do.
I can't sit all day all that much. and those are almost all in bedding areas. So I'm in there before daylight, hour and a half, and leaving a half hour after dark. So you just can't do that all the time. You get sleep deprivation, big time.
Yeah.
So a lot of my hunts are in the evenings and mornings outside of bedding areas.
How much of targeting a specific buck, like you get a buck that you really want, how much of that do you do versus just putting yourself in the position to kill any mature buck that might be there? For instance, like as I'm doing my scouting here, I have tended to hunt the places that have more mature bucks, whether or not it's like there's a giant, game changer buck in there. But if there's 5 mature bucks in one location and they're using the area quite a bit, I tend to hunt that as opposed to a place where there's, a 160 inch, but he's the only guy in town. I like to prefer to get my odds on any mature buck over that. But how does that work with you? Do you have bucks that get all of your attention?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If I hunt sign, okay, I'm not one of those guys that goes out looking for deer and looking for bucks and then, okay, I'm going to target that buck. But I do have cameras out. So if I get a monster buck on camera, yeah, I'm going to specifically I want that deer. Okay. So I may have, and it's really simple for me to put that in perspective because when we go to Kansas, we may have coming into a scrape area because almost all of our hunting locations are at primary scrape areas. And we hunt within a 30-mile area, so 30-mile radius. So we're hunting a 60-mile circle. We may have on camera in one evening, a couple of 125s and a 125 or a 140 and then a 160, And then if we hunt that location, me and my boys, when I say boys, they're 50. So when we hunt that, we're targeting that buck. We won't shoot the other bucks. And in Michigan, if I have a big buck, yeah, I'm targeting that. But I'm also going to hunt him smart. I'm not going to hunt stupid and overhunt the location and spook him before the rut phases. I'll probably try and target him the first day 1, 2, or 3, 4. In the first 5 days of the season, early season, I'll try and target him in a transition zone between a feeding and a bedding area or something like that, because I won't go in the bedding area. But typically, because there's so much hunting pressure here and so much preseason scouting by other hunters and preseason location preparation, it's very rare that there's a big buck where I'm hunting in Michigan that is not nocturnal outside of his bedding area prior to season. That preseason scouting and location preparation has pushed those bucks back into the secure confines of their bedding areas, and they rarely leave those during daylight hours. So early season, my odds are pretty low of getting one. I did kill a 154 incher in 2014. Fortunate he was still moving during daylight on opening day in the morning, but it's very rare. So typically during the rut phases is pre-ruts when I'm going to start targeting. But I will definitely target a specific buck and pass up other bucks that may make book, but they're not as big as him. I've got enough bucks that I'm not too concerned about missing out on a book buck, but it's a smaller book buck.
Yeah. So let's say you've got the one you're targeting, and 2 seasons have gone by, you haven't been able to kill him. Going into that third year, what's your scouting like? How much scouting are you still doing for him versus staying out of the area? Like, you're going into your third year targeting one specific buck, and you really want him. Does your scouting change at all, and your preparation to kill him change at all?
No, usually he's using the same haunts because if he's a mature buck, he stayed alive doing the same things he did for those previous 2 years or 3 years, whatever the case may be. So typically, if I kill a buck like that, it's going to be at a primary scrape area, either on the edge of a bedding area or the interior of a bedding area. Usually when you kill those big bucks, it's in a bedding area or a transition zone between two bedding areas that has security cover. I killed a 14 point, 150 inch 14 point and 154 inch 10 point in a small transition zone, a very, very narrow but very short transition zone between two bedding areas. Basically, it was up on a little rise. There's a bedding area here of all brush and nasty brush and briars. And as soon as you went over this little rise, then it dropped down into a swamp with water and cattails and marsh grasses and brush and stuff. And I've killed 2 monster bucks in that tiny little transition zone between, during the rut phases. And it had the adequate security cover to transition from one to the other. And on the 14 point side, I was targeting him. I'd been after him for 3 seasons. The 10 point I knew was in the area, but that was the first year I hunted for him. That's the first year he was in the area, that Big 10, and I shot him. The 14 point I targeted for 3 years. And the only time, very interesting, I need to tell this. I shot him at straight up noon, and it had just had a snow squall. It was November 11th. It had just finished snowing. The first time I saw that buck was 3 years earlier. While I wasn't really scouting. I had a tree that I wanted to prep during season back around the edge of a cornfield, a standing cornfield. So I didn't want to make an intrusion. So I put on my scent lock, and it was during a hard rain to mask my noise, walking and prepping a tree. And I went around the cornfield and prepped this tree. And when I'm coming back out, and it was almost straight up noon when I'm coming out, and I am drenched to the bone. But it was like 55 degrees, so it wasn't that big a deal. And as soon as I walked around the edge of the standing cornfield, I looked down. I was turning to go to my right towards the road, my car, and here's this monster buck. This is the first time I ever laid eyes on him. He was down the edge of this corn working a scrape underneath a bush, right on the edge of the corn. And as soon as I broke the edge and looked at him, he turned his head and looked at me. He's like 40 yards away. Now, I don't have my bow. And we're just staring at each other for maybe 5 seconds. And I thought he would run straight into the corn because it was a huge cornfield. And instead he turned around, ran back into the timber, which had a lot of understory in it. So the first time I saw him was during a driving rain at straight up noon. The second time I saw him was the following year, and I was on an all-day sit in just off that pinch point. I was in the swamp bedding area on that side, and I hadn't seen a deer all day on this all-day sit. And right at dark, gray light, and it was raining. It was during a rain. Here comes a doe, and she's running through, and here comes this buck behind her, and they went through so fast. I didn't have an opportunity to grab my bow and stop him first shot. So again, it was raining the day I saw him that time. And then the next year I shot him. He was right after a snow squall, precipitation again, straight up noon. I shot him.
Right at noon again.
Right at noon again, yes. So I saw him 2 times at noon, and I saw him 3 times total. All 3 times it was during precipitation.
That's a great transition to talk about. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is hunting rain. I was going to say rain, but we can just say precipitation. But what have you found precipitation does with deer movement, and what do you like about it? Do you see more deer, or do you see that mature bucks are moving more during that time? What have you learned over the years through precipitation?
During hard driving rains, they typically don't move very well. But if you get a light drizzle to just a light rain with not a lot, 5-mile-an-hour winds, they move phenomenally well. You don't see a lot of deer. You don't see a lot of deer activity like you do does and subordinate bucks on a bluebird day, but you'll see mature bucks. Mature bucks like moving in the rain because they can move quietly. When you get a mature buck in a pressured area and he's moving on dry leaves, he'll take a few steps and then he'll stop and wait for 5 minutes to see if there's any reaction. They're just super cautious moving in daylight when it's dry and they're making noise, or on a snow when it's crusted over. They just don't like making noise. And on a light rain or a drizzle, their sense of smell is better too. It's just like if you're hunting rabbits with a dog can trail a rabbit much better on moist snow than on dry, cold snow where it's like 5 degrees out. They can smell better, and deer can smell better, and they can move quietly, and I think that's why they move in rain, and they move in midday. Mature bucks like moving in midday because they're lazy, just like we are. They will typically come into a bedding area, even during the rut phases. If they're not with a doe, they'll come into a bedding area and they'll bed down till 9 or 10, 11 o'clock. And then they'll get up and they can scent check the interiors of their bedding areas just by going just inside the edge around the whole perimeter. And there's almost always a runway around the perimeter of the inside of a bedding area. And they can scent check anything that came into that bedding area before or after or shortly after daybreak. And then if there's nothing in there that smells good, like something's close to or in heat, if they have adequate transition security cover to another bedding area within their core living area, they'll take that transition security cover to the next bedding area and scent check the perimeter of that for anything that might be inside the bedding area. So deer are lazy, big bucks are lazy, and that's why that midday movement happens. It's not because they're avoiding hunters in the morning and in the evening. It's just their natural way of movement. Even when I go to Kansas or Iowa, they still have that midday movement. We don't have to hunt the midday movement out there like we do here, because the deer are also out there moving the mornings and in the evenings because there's so many mature bucks. The rut's a lot more competitive. They're moving all the time.
So is your favorite weather to hunt a light rain, or what's your favorite weather day? Yeah,
a drizzle rain. I love hunting in a drizzle rain. You don't see a lot of deer, and anytime you don't see a lot of other deer, you have less chances of getting picked. Okay, deer walk around here looking in trees for for hunters. So, on bluebird days when you're hunting, even like at a mast or, a mat, let's say you're hunting at a white oak. I use white oaks a lot because I hunt white oaks a lot. When I'm in my saddle, I'm set up on the 6 o'clock side of the tree from the destination spot. So if there's a white oak, it's totally 180 degrees on the opposite side of the tree from where I'm sitting. So I'm hiding. I'm using the tree as a hiding buffer because there'll be sometimes 5 or 6 deer there feeding for 20 minutes to possibly a half an hour, and I don't want to get picked. I never worry about getting winded. I always worry about getting picked.
Yeah.
So the less chance of me getting picked, the better. So I hide behind the tree, and even when I'm in my saddle, if I'm in a transition zone between bedding areas or bedding to feeding in the early season, I will move around the tree on my ring of steps to keep the tree as a hiding buffer so I don't get picked as they're transitioning through.
What size tree is your favorite tree to set up in?
Um, Probably 16 inches, I would say,
Yeah,
16,
like
18
your
inches. Most guys,
shoulder
yeah,
shoulder width,
cover, yeah,
maybe.
cover your
Yeah.
body. And most guys you see on YouTube that are setting up in saddles, they're in 12-inch trees. Most guys, most guys on YouTube that are showing using saddles really don't know what they're doing. To be perfectly honest with you, not because I like bigger trees, and I also like it if they're where there's a crotch. The more wood there is to break up any body profile, the better. I like hunting just above a crotch. Just makes more stuff there to hide your carcass.
Um, Back on the rain and the weather, real quick.
Yeah, there's a whole
During
chapter. There's a
there is
complete chapter in the book about hunting in inclement weather, by the way, and clothing
okay,
and all that
awesome. During the, during a light rain, light drizzle, if it's consistent, you're seeing mature buck movement. What about right before or right after a rain, whether it's drizzle or right before, right after a hard driving rain? The
stuff.
the thing that we think of is that the movement's going to pick up right before or right after that. What have you seen?
Yeah, typically that's the case. If it's a driving rain, yeah, typically they don't move in a driving rain. Just like, I've shot bucks in 35-mile-an-hour winds. When it gets up to 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds, they don't like moving in that. Too much movement, too much noise. But, a lot of times you'll have nasty weather, like super windy. And then if you look at the weather forecast, winds die to maybe 15 or 20 miles an hour, you know, a half hour before dark, or you got a driving rain. And a lot of hunters don't like hunting in a driving rain, but maybe an hour before dark, that rain lightens up or stops. Man, the deer move like crazy as soon as that rain stops, especially if it's been a long rain because they want to feed. Because
Yeah,
during the driving rains, they just stay bedded. They stay
yeah,
nice and securely bedded. So, you may have to suffer in the rain for 2 hours, and then right at that hour before dark, when it lightens up, man, activity comes out big time. And then the guys that are sitting there on the couch said, "Man, look at it outside. I wish I could send my tree." So you got to have the right gear, though. Gear is super important when you're hunting nasty weather. Like in the wind, you've got to have polyurethane lined garments to block the wind, or you'll get cold super fast. And in rain, you got to have good rain gear. And ScentLock doesn't make very good rain gear, in my personal opinion. So I'm a big Rivers West guy. I wear Rivers West over top of my ScentLock in a hard rain.
and you stay dry.
Yeah, so Rivers West is the best rain gear out there.
Yeah, that's one thing I probably need to invest in some better rain gear because I usually just hunt this. I wear the same thing that I hunt in a bluebird day during the rain, and I just get myself comfortable with being wet all day. And
Yeah,
that's just a mental thing. But I've gotten to the point where I'm like, look, I'm going to get soaked, but the moment I'm soaked, I can't get any more wet than I am right now. So it's okay, and then I get used to that feeling. But I'm sure it would be better to be be dry the whole day than to just get used to that feeling, you know?
I used to do that when I was younger because they didn't make very good rain gear. I'd get drenched, but man, you get out there in the rain and it's 35 degrees.
Oh,
Man,
that's different. Yeah,
that drive you out. That drive you out of the tree.
yeah.
So yeah, Rivers. If you're looking to get a really nice uh, rain gear, Rivers West makes one that's called the Backcountry Original Backcountry suit,
Yep.
and that is probably the best waterproof suit made. And it's not overly expensive. It's
Is
the
it
original Backcountry.
is it quiet?
Yes, it is quiet.
Yeah.
Has polyurethane. No, it actually does not. It's the old way they used to make their clothing. It's a triple layer clothing, so there is no polyurethane membrane to make any noise. It's just got a super deep weave fabric, and yeah, and you can wash it. Something else you can do with that particular suit, you can wash it and dry it in a hot dryer, and it doesn't affect the waterproofing. Most of your waterproof garments have polyurethane membranes, and they recommend you do not wash it in warm water and put it in a hot dryer because it delaminates the membrane from the fabric, and then you'll start leaking at the seams.
Let's talk about grunting a little bit. Do you grunt at all, and when do you utilize it?
Pretty rare that I grunt. About the only time I grunt is if I spar in a buck and he hangs up in a distance, and let's say he's 50 yards away. I can't make another sparring sequence because that takes time, and he would pick me in the tree. So I will take out my inhale soft grunt and kind of turn around and just really softly just do a real short single grunt and give him a direction to come to.
That was the exact scenario I was thinking about when I asked you the question, was if you were rattling or sparring a buck in and then they get hung up with, like they tend to do a lot at 50 yards.
Yeah.
What do you do to get them to come in? So just a soft grunt. It doesn't always work, right? But
typically, if you have the adequate security cover between where the deer is and where you're at, and he can't see a deer from that security cover, he'll typically commit to coming in. But if you made a sparring sequence, even if you were on the ground and made a sparring sequence, he'd be able to see two bucks moving, typically.
Right.
Whereas a single buck standing could make a grunt call and be very well concealed.
Very true. Yep. Have you ever used a snort wheeze?
I have. I have never used a snort wheeze successfully, but I have definitely used a snort wheeze.
Yeah.
Yes. I've heard many bucks do snort wheezes, but I've never successfly called in a buck with a snort wheeze.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's never worked for me. I don't do it that often. So.
Now let's say that you're hunting up in your tree, and you see a cruising buck. The buck is 65, 70 yards. He's cruising left to right in front of you. What do you do at that point to maybe try to get him to turn and come into you? Or what's your strategy when you see that?
It's going to depend on the cover. It's going to depend on the ground cover between him and me again. Everything depends on the security cover and their visual to me. So typically, if he's cruising, I might hit my bag real short, 3 seconds maybe, or do an exhale grunt call, which is a louder grunt call. Now, one time I had a buck with a hot doe, and they were probably 120, 30 yards away from me, and they were cruising, and they were not coming my direction. They were going a totally different direction. And I did a rattle sequence. He stopped, looked my direction, and obviously took back up with the doe. And then I did a grunt call. He stopped for like 2 seconds and then took back up with a doe. And then I'm like, okay, I got to get that doe's attention. So I did a fawn in distress. I got a Quaker Boy fawn in distress call, which is actually a coyote call. And I hit that, and the doe turned and came right over to the tree, and he followed her, and I shot him. Yeah.
Yep. That's an interesting one. Yeah. That's a good idea. Fawn in distress.
Yep. That's the only time I've ever used it, and it worked to perfection.
Because that's the time where it's the least chances of getting a buck to get anywhere near you is when they're on that hot doe cruising by.
Absolutely.
It seems like nothing works. So yeah, that's a good one to throw into this strategy.
If he ain't turning.
Yeah, exactly.
And another time I had 2 bucks going, and this was second day of season, and this was morning. I have better luck on mornings than I have anything else on calling. I had 2 deer walking through some timber with some semblance of security cover, not dense, but they were walking through some timber heading to a bedding area in the morning about 8 o'clock. And I could see legs. I couldn't see their bodies because there's foliage on the trees. And they get they're probably 100 yards away, and they're going away from me now. So I got out my rattle bag, and I did a rattle sequence, a sparring sequence, not a rattle sequence, because this was early October. And they turned, and they came back, and there was an oak about 70 yards away, and they came underneath that oak, kind of staring in my direction. And there was a lot of brush between them and me. And they started eating acorns. They kind of lost interest in the sparring, and they started eating acorns. And after about 5 minutes, they started to walk away back towards the bedding area again. And I'm like, okay, they're too close for me to spar again because I can see them. So I can't do a sparring sequence because they'll pick me in the tree because it's a time thing. And so I took out my inhale grunt call and did a soft inhale grunt call, and they both turned and walked right by me. It was a 10 and an 8 point, and I shot the 10 point.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just came over out of curiosity. They were just calm as could be. That's one thing about sparring. They don't come over with their ears laid back and their hair ruffled. It's just a social thing, sparring.
How important are cold fronts for you, or the first cold front? Let's talk about cold fronts a little bit. We touched on precipitation, but um, I would imagine is an early cold front a must hunt day for you.
Yeah. Cold fronts always spur activity, and hot weather always declines activity. So, to give you an idea, my son Chris, he went to this is Iowa, so nothing compares to Iowa and Kansas, but he was in Iowa and he was hunting this place called the Hole. It was a place that was by the Iowa River, and it's like a quarter of a mile of just marsh and brush and nasty bedding area along the river. And when it floods, that's all covered with water. But anyway, it was dry this particular year, and it was 80 degrees for 3 days. And he's hunting down in this hole, and typically that just gets tons of activity going along the river, security cover wise. And he never saw one buck in 3 days. They had a 35-degree drop in temperature. The next day, he saw 11 bucks and shot a Pope and Young buck.
Yeah.
Cold fronts make a big, big difference. Cold weather always spurs activity. Hot weather always makes a decline in activity.
What about moon phase? Do you pay attention to that at all?
Zero. That's a BS in my opinion. Total BS. That's been proven so many times to be fallacy. Um, Moon phase has, over the years, when there's a full moon during the rut phases, let's look at rut phase activity here because that's primarily what you're talking about, I'm sure. When there's a full moon and there's no clouds in the sky and it's bright out at night, like daytime, and there's probably a 5 to 6 day period where it's like that. When there's no cloud cover, mature bucks here, they don't go out into the crop fields with the does at night and stuff. So during the rut phases, they don't search as much because the does are all out in vulnerable areas. To them, it's too bright. So they have a lot of movement the next day in the secure transition routes where there's does and stuff. There's a lot higher activity the next day during the rut phases. But if it's a full moon and you've got cloud cover or it's raining and it's gray, it's dark, it's dark outside, the mature bucks do exactly what they normally do. So the physical weather conditions during the moon phase have way more to do with deer movements than the moon phase. To keep in mind, all studies are done in captive environments. Moon phase studies, even the ones that Charles Alsheimer did, his moon phase studies were done in his captive enclosure. So anytime you do studies in a captive enclosure where there's no hunting, to me, it's irrelevant for a hunting scenario.
So you would, though, pay a little bit of attention during a full moon phase if the right weather conditions made sure that those bucks were not, out in the fields at night, because then it does teach you a little something, right? And tells you where to be.
If there's a full moon and it's bright, I definitely want to be in the woods the next day, especially during midday. There's a lot of midday movement by mature bucks in the right types of places.
Yeah,
during the rut phases.
Yeah, in a very thick spot, right, where there's a lot of security.
Yeah, where there's security cover. And when I say security cover, I'm talking about the best security cover you have in your area. I'm not talking about, thick shit that you can't even walk through. I'm talking about just dense brush here and there and scattered stuff. Just some semblance of security cover.
Yeah.
Tall weeds, cattails, marsh grasses, stuff like
Shed hunting. Do you do any shed hunting at all?
I do not have no interest in finding something. If I can't kill it, I don't want it.
So
It means
that
nothing to me.
so when you're scouting, presumably during shed hunting season, right? Like
Yeah,
there's
I'm not looking for sheds.
you're not looking, but have you
Yeah.
ever stumbled across them while
Oh,
you're
oh
scouting? Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but I have to physically almost walk on them because I'm looking at the security cover. I'm looking ahead, and I'm not focusing on looking for sheds while I'm scouting. If
Yeah.
I just happen to stumble on it, I stumble on it. But yeah, I hunt sign during season, so sheds don't really mean much to me.
Let's talk a little bit about majority of the hunters out there don't have a lot of time to hunt, right? Or
Right.
scout. They're busy lives, full time jobs, kids, everything, right? And then it's not their job, or it's not there's not enough um, all the time you have to take away from other things to be incredibly good at hunting. Um, that's not for everybody. So the average guy who doesn't have a lot of time to spend scouting,
Mhm.
let's say he's got one weekend to scout. What would you tell that person to do to make the best out of his scouting in that one weekend?
Well, typically people that don't have a lot of time to hunt, they're not as fussy about what they want to kill. So they're probably happy killing a deer,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a year and a half old buck, and maybe possibly even a doe. So I would definitely tell them to scout for food sources. Look for oaks that are dropping acorns, chestnuts that are dropping that. In a lot of big timber areas, they'll eat choke cherries, they'll eat locust beans, they'll eat the beech nuts. Whatever the preferred in the south, persimmons. That's a biggie. So whatever the preferred food source, it doesn't take a lot of time to see what look up what the preferred food sources are in the area, what kind of trees you have, and look for food because food's going to attract deer. You want to hunt around a food source. That's why people that bait, they see a lot of deer. They don't typically see a lot of the big bucks unless they're on a managed property like the TV guys. They put bait out all the time in the weeds. Deer will come for 150 yards and all of a sudden stick their head down in the weeds 20 yards from the guy's blind and wonder why they're doing that. So that's why bait hunters are successful just shooting deer because deer come to bait. So I would suggest you know putting out not putting out bait, but looking for places where there's food because hunting in bedding areas has to be done very strategically. I would definitely never tell a novice guy that's not going to hunt but a couple weekends a year to do that. I don't think they would do it correctly. It's got to be done strategically and scent control and all that stuff. So I would definitely tell them to search for food sources and try to find the best food sources that has some semblance of security cover around it for daytime activity.
Yeah, if you've got one weekend, you still have about 16 to 20 hours you could be in the woods.
Mhm.
So I would say probably at least try to get 5, 6, 7 different spots too, right? Like try to bounce around. Don't spend too much time in one area, and give yourself a bunch of different locations because those, like you said, they probably don't have a lot of time during the season either, and they're probably not going to
Oh, you
spend it.
mean if he's scouting? You meant if he's scouting this time of year?
No, well, no, I'm talking like scouting now for the upcoming season. If
Oh
they
yeah,
have one
definitely.
weekend to scout, yeah.
Definitely have multiple spots. Yeah, I thought you were talking about going in during season and scouting during season.
Yeah, like scout now, but then they might also only have 2 or 3 weekends during the season to hunt too.
Right.
You know, so giving them as many options as they can, and plus they're probably not going to be as dialed in scent control wise as you are, so they're gonna need to play that wind. Um, so you want to have multiple spots in case like you have a bad wind that none of this, your only spot you scouted isn't going to be huntable, right?
Yeah, they got to make sure they're playing the wind correct. So, and
Yeah.
that's pretty simple to do when you're hunting at a food source. Because usually if there's a bedding area nearby, it's they're going to be coming from the bedding area in the evening. But
Yeah.
I would recommend uh, you know, food sources are best hunted in the evenings. Mast and fruit trees are best hunted in the evenings because you're going to blow deer out of there with your morning entries that are when they're feeding there. So, if you are scouting this time of year and you do find some food sources, it might not be a bad idea to find out where the bedding areas are locally as well, and possibly set up a location or two between that, from that bedding area to that tree. And then on morning hunts, you'd want to hunt the tree closest to the bedding area on that transition route from that feeding zone back to the bedding area. Okay, because that way you're not spooking the deer feeding at the feeding zone with your entry. You're catching them coming back from that food source in the morning, to bed down in the bedding area. So you'd have evening spots would be at the actual food source. Morning spots would be, closer to the bedding area to catch them transitioning back.
How much shooting do you do in practicing with your bow?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day. It's from like August on. And I'm only shooting a 40-pound bow because I've had shoulder issues. So Matthews made me a special bow. So, yeah, I shoot every day, even during season. I try to shoot every day. A lot of guys practice all the time, and then they quit practicing during season. I had a buddy that he was a superb archer. He was an archery teacher. And he went for 7 weeks during season. He was hunting in Iowa for a 200-inch buck. And he went 7 weeks without shooting his bow. He was out there for 7 weeks. And when he got his shot at that buck at 17 yards, he shot low.
Oh, man.
Cut its side open. Didn't kill it. And the guy killed it during muzzleloader season. 200 inches, 204 eighths. 14 point typical.
So during the season, are you shooting when you get back, when you get out of the tree in the morning, you come back, are you shooting once or twice then? Or when are you shooting during the season?
I'm shooting, well, obviously if I'm on an all-day sit, I'm not shooting. But yeah, when I'm coming back in the middle of the day, I'll get up on my roof or up in a tree and shoot. I never shoot on the ground. I always practice from a similar height that I hunt from. So my bow is always zeroed in from the same type of shooting form from my tree.
What do you think? Is there anything that we didn't really touch on? I mean, I know scent control is a huge thing, and we could go into that forever.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you're going to be teaching a seminar on that at Huntstock.
No. I mean, unless they wanted it, that would be a full hour seminar, and I'd do it if they wanted. I'm fine with that, whatever you want.
Yeah. Is it? Well, why don't we just ask this? Is it an all or nothing thing? Do you have to do everything 100% right with your scent control regimen, or is there something that the person who doesn't have a lot of time to commit to it can do that will increase their odds, not get them to be 100 all the way? Talk about that a little bit. Is it all or nothing, or is there a couple of things that you could do that won't take a lot of time that can better your odds?
Well, all or nothing if you never ever want to have to be concerned about getting winded. It has to be all or nothing. But if you wore a jacket and pants, just your jacket and pants, which, Sunlock makes nice clothing. It's not overly expensive. It's probably a third the cost of Sitka or Kuiu, which has zero technology, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's going to probably knock down 60% of your odor. You're going to have, on average, about 40% of your odors coming out of your head, your hair follicles, your beard, your eyes, your nose. So that's going to help. It's going to knock it down. So you're going to have a little bit less chance of getting winded, but you still better pay attention to the wind, in my opinion, if you don't use a head cover. But to me, if you want to do it right, it's not a big deal. It really is not that difficult. Everybody makes it sound like, oh my God, you got to do all this stuff. Once you get into the regiment, it is nothing different than what you're doing with your regular clothes. You wash your clothes in scent-free detergent, so they're scent-free when you put them on. But if they're permeable, like that cotton hoodie you got on, within 20 minutes, if that hoodie sat outside for 100 years and it had zero human odor on it whatsoever, and you put it on, within 20, 30 minutes, your odor is permeating through that permeable cotton hoodie. That hoodie is going to have some absorptivity. It's going to absorb some odors, but within 20 minutes, your odor is going to be passing through it into the environment. And that's what activated carbon does. It absorbs all your molecules, so it doesn't pass through into the environment. It's the same thing as a chemical warfare suit. It's the exact same technology. Every military on the face of this earth uses activated carbon in military chemical warfare suits. So if they get chemical bombs, it doesn't get to the human body and kill the soldier. It's the exact same. It just because activated carbon works both directions, whether
Yeah.
you're going that way or coming this way. So it's the same exact technology. And if every military in the world uses it, obviously there's some legitimacy to it. NASA uses it in their spacesuits. It's used in literally, activated carbon is used in literally thousands and thousands of absorptive capacities, water purification, uh, face masks, paint respirators, you name it.
Yeah, it's a good point that it's really not as, I guess, time consuming as you would think, because, like you said, you're already washing your clothes, and most hunters are washing in unscented soap anyway. And then I guess the only difference is when you take it out of the laundry, instead of putting it on a hanger or folding it and putting it in your dresser, you're putting it into a plastic tote instead,
Yeah, you're
right?
putting it into an airtight tote, and you don't wash it. You just throw it in the dryer. You don't. You rarely ever wash your scent suit.
Yeah, but all your other stuff, your base layers and socks and all of that, it's just you're putting it in a tote and then you get dressed at the spot you're going, not at home and wearing it into your truck, right? Is
Yeah,
that
the only difference is you when you get ready to get dressed, you put on your undergarments that are in whatever tote they are that you've got washed in scent-free detergent, and you open up your scent lock tote and you put on your scent lock jacket and your scent lock pants, which is in their own tote, and then you go hunting. So your jacket and pants are in a different, and head covers are in a different tote than your layering garments. But other than that, all the prep is done at home. You just every 4 to 6 hunts, you are deabsorbing your clothes and putting them back in an airtight container. And then the only time you wear those hunting clothes, your exterior scent lock clothing, is when you're physically in the field hunting. So you drive to where you're going in your street clothes, then you put on your layering garments, put on your scent lock stuff, go out, go hunting. As soon as you get back, take off your scent lock, put it back in the airtight tote, and do whatever. So the only process really is deabsorbing it every once in a while. It's not that big a deal. And keeping your other stuff clean. Like you got to wash your aiders on your sticks every so often. If you're not using an activated carbon line backpack, you've got to wash your backpack in scent-free detergent. Keep that in an airtight tote because so many hunters have had scent lock in the past and used it ineffectively, or else even if they had a head cover, they got a backpack and they probably get into it every day with their bare hands when they all change the stuff that's in it, reorganize it for the next hunt. And so you got a huge human scent wick in the tree with you in your backpack. So
yeah.
if you get winded, you blame your scent lock on it, and it was your backpack. There's so many other things that if you're not taking care of it properly, that you could get winded. And so it's not the scent lock that was the fault. It was your fault because you didn't do this correctly. And I don't blame the hunters because scent lock has not done a very good job of educating hunters how to use scent lock in conjunction with other scent-free items to be a scent-free hunter. They've done a pretty poor job of that.
Is there an activated carbon backpack out there?
Yeah, scent lock makes a couple.
Is that what
I'm
you
not
what
a
do you
fan of
use?
I use a scent lock custom pack. Years ago I had them send me some fabric and I sent it to a custom backpack maker and I've got 6 custom backpacks that I've made for myself. Now scent lock's looking at doing that same backpack in 2026. My backpack.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, and mine is really flimsy. It's made out of a really soft fleece. So once you hang it up, as soon as you take stuff out of it, the pack folds down to the tree. It just kind of compresses. Whereas most backpacks,
Yeah.
90% of the backpacks have a rigid frame. I'm not saying they have a plastic frame inside, but the fabric is rigid and it holds its shape even when it's empty. So it's a bigger profile in the tree, so you're more apt to get picked. Mine, when you take stuff out of it, it folds down and collapses to the tree. So it's got a less of a profile in the tree for a deer to notice. That in Michigan, in places with heavy pressure like PA and New York and areas in Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Ohio, deer looking trees for people. So you've got to really be careful on your profile up in the tree.
what do you wear for a head cover when you're hunting? Is everything except for your eyes covered up?
Everything but my eyes. Yep. My nose is covered. My mouth is covered. My neck is covered. The head cover is a drop down, so you tuck it into your jacket. And then when I get ready to take a shot, I'll pick up my bow, and then I'll reach up with my right hand and I'll grab the head cover at the chin and I'll just pull it all underneath my chin so it doesn't impede my anchor point. It doesn't impede my shot.
Now, do you eat when you're in the stand at all, or you just don't eat all day?
On an all day sit, yeah, I'll take a couple apples. I'll take maybe 3 or 4 granola bars. I'll take them out of the package and put them in a Ziploc. Maybe a Hershey bar and maybe a peanut butter sandwich in a Ziploc. And the
You
apples, once I eat the apples, I'll take the cores and put them in the Ziploc baggie so they don't have any odor. I'll seal them shut.
you just try to eat as fast as you can so that
Yeah,
none of that's in. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And usually you're eating in the midday when there's not as much deer traffic. Mornings and evenings you see a lot of does and stuff. Midday you're more apt to see a mature buck, but you got 11 to 3 is typically the time, so you got 5 minutes or so where you're taking a chance on you got to
Yeah.
eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I even go to the bathroom in the tree.
I was gonna say, what do you do when you got to go to the bathroom?
But I've got a pee bottle, and if I have to do the other, I pull my saddle up under my knees and lower my pants, and I go in a 1.5 gallon Ziploc bag and then seal it.
No way. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
way. I'm not going to go down on the ground and put that odor on the ground by any means.
Cool. Yeah, that all touches the subject. So, do you think on the peeing thing, guys who's pee into scrapes, what's your whole thought on that? Or some guys will say just pee out of your stand because it's going to break down and it's just going to be ammonia, which is not the deer's. It's going to smell just like a deer pee after a few minutes. What are your thoughts on all of
Yeah,
that?
yeah, it's gonna. The key word in that sentence was it's gonna
It's gonna.
break
Yeah.
down. Okay, so when you pee out of a tree, if you've ever smelled human urine and you've smelled fresh deer urine, they do not smell the same. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you pee out of a tree, if a mature buck comes by within a 20 minute to possibly a half an hour, and he's downwind, uh, he will know that's not deer pee. Okay. If you're just hunting for a 1.5 year old and 2.5 year old bucks and you're peeing out of the tree and you're seeing deer all the time and you think, oh, well, this is fine. Well, you know what? If that's what you're happy shooting, fine, do it. But if you're hunting in a pressure area and you don't want to pee out of a tree because there may be that half-hour time frame when it has a definite human odor to it and he comes through, then you're screwed. Okay? So I take all the precautionary things that I can. I'm an odds guy. So anything that's going to raise my odds, I'm going to do it. Yeah, after a half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever the case may be, it just goes into like an ammonia odor and probably doesn't matter. So if you pee in a mock scrape or something, odds are a deer's not going to come by there for several hours. So by then it's not going to make any difference. But if it comes by there, you know, within minutes after you urinate in it, they're going to notice that that's not deer pee. I rep for tanks, okay? I know what fresh deer pee looks like. Most of these urine companies, they bottle their urines, even the estrus urines, they bottle it in June and July, and they collect those urines in 55-gallon drums. They basically will inject those and bring them into estrus in June or July, and then they pee in grates, and then they collect that urine. So they're peeing where there's deer droppings and other odors, and they're exposed to a lot of air, oxygen. So there's a lot of bacteria. And then they put them in 55-gallon drums, and then they put them in little bottles, and you're opening them and closing them and opening them and closing them, and they have a lot of bacteria in them. I don't even use commercial deer peas. So I use real tarsals from deer. I cut off deer, and that's my primary. If I'm going to use some kind of a scent, that's what I use. I freeze them. I shrink wrap them and freeze them, and I use those as deer dries. Occasionally, I don't use it that often, but I actually have a video of using a tarsal scent drag. I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago I put it out, and I had two different bucks cut that tarsal drag and follow it right to the 14-yard spot where I hung it in a creek bed. And one came from one direction because I drug it to the creek bed, and then I went past about 50 yards and drug it the other direction to the creek bed and hung it in a little tree. And both of those bucks came in, not at the same time, different times, and they physically licked on that tarsal gland for probably 30 seconds, and it's all on video.
Wow.
I didn't shoot either one. Neither one was a nice buck, but he had two broken tines, so I didn't shoot him.
On that note, with hanging the tarsal gland up and stuff, do you ever make mock scrapes at all, or you just like to find the primary scrapes, hunt the natural one? Have you played with mock scrapes at all?
I have in the past. Mock scrapes work, but my hunting locations are so far away from me that I can't go freshen stuff up like I would like to. My closest hunting spot's 35 minutes.
Yeah.
So I rarely dick with scrapes anymore. I like to let my locations work on the merits I chose it for. And if scrapes are active, I'm going to hunt it. And if they're active, there's no reason to doctor them up.
Mm-hmm.
Why put commercial stuff on there when it's working on its own?
Yep. And then what about you? You mentioned earlier somebody wearing a super bright headlamp going into their spot or leaving. What do you wear to get into your spots and out of them in dark? What do you
I
use?
use a small one or a two cell AAA flashlight. Just a little tiny Streamlight makes a single AAA flashlight. And then I have an old Browning single AAA flashlight. I just want it bright enough to see the ground so I'm not stepping on twigs and making noise, and to see my tacks up in front of me. I never wear a headlamp. I never wear a headlamp unless I'm physically blood trailing a deer. They're way too bright. They spook deer big time, way in advance where people don't even know it. That's one thing, because I hunt public land a lot. I deal with a lot of other hunters, and I'm always in my tree well before anybody else comes into the woods because I'm in my tree so early in the dark. And, I'll see hunters come in with headlamps, and a quarter mile away from them, they're spooking deer running by me. They've totally screwed up my hunt just with their entry, even though they may only be coming in 100 to 200 yards off the road.
Yeah.
They're spooking deer that far ahead when the foliage is down because that headlight's moving around. And they know it's not a car, it's coming their direction.
So what do you use when you get to your tree? I mean, or how do you keep the light on? Do you put it between your teeth as you're climbing?
If I need it, it's between my teeth usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have videos on that. I have two videos in succession on Eberhart Outdoors YouTube channel of headlamps and how bright they are compared to small lamps, and when you compared to a little AAA. And when you watch that video, you will definitely know why they spook deer. And everybody uses headlamps. And when you're using a headlamp, when you're using a flashlight, it's in your hand. You're directionally putting it down on the ground. So 90% of the time, it's on the ground. It's pointing down.
Yeah.
Headlamps, you got them. You're looking at the ground to see in front of you, but then you're looking up too, and your light's just shining all over the place. And guys using headlamps getting out of their tree at night. Man, I watch guys in the dark and headlamps going all over the frickin' place. Deer can see a headlamp for a half a mile. A little tiny beam from a small flashlight, they can't see that very far. And you're only using it on the ground. So, they probably can't see that light any farther than they can hear you moving on the ground. And I just use it just a light far enough to see my tacks in front of me and see the ground. And if there's any ambient light at night, I don't even use my light.
Mm-hmm. What about your?
I don't use a light to climb my tree, to be perfectly frank with you.
Yeah, if you can see a little bit,
your eyes are adjusted to it.
Yeah, if you can see a little bit, then.
Yeah.
And ground noise. Do you do anything to try to mask your ground noise or to sound like a deer when you're walking, or when you're getting in and out of your spot? Are you just kind of getting there as fast as you can? How is your ingress and egress on ground noise?
I don't really pay it. Obviously, if I have the opportunity, I'll walk runways during my preseason speed tours, and When I say runways, I mean entry and exit routes. And I will throw twigs. I'll actually carry a branch with me or something, and I'll flip any twigs that I might step on that's going to snap and make noise out of the way. And that may be on a half-mile entry. So
Yeah.
it'll take an hour to do one runway, one entry route. But as far as raking them and stuff, I'll go into season with 50 trees prepped, 50 trees ready to hunt. I mean, they're not all prepped, obviously, on public land. So I don't have time to go and manicure, entry and exit routes. But entry and exit routes are really important because lots of guys use the same entry route all the time as they do exit routes. So if you're hunting, let's say you're hunting 50 yards inside the timber along a crop field. Okay, it's 50 yards off the crop field to the tree. I never would enter on an evening hunt. I would never enter walking down the edge of the timber because while the bucks may be bedded back in the timber or back in the bedding area farther, does a lot of times and subordinate bucks and fawns, they're going to bed on the peripheral edges of those crop fields. And when you're walking that edge, you're spooking them. And when you're spooking them back in the direction of where you want your deer to come from in the evening on your hunt. So you are being very detrimental by walking down that field edge. I'll walk out, maybe if it's a short crop field, I'll walk out 100 yards from the field, from the timber edge, and I'll walk straight out into the field. And then when I get perpendicular to where I got to go in to get into my tree, I'll make a beeline right over to that edge and go right down to my tree. And then in the evening, because I don't want to spook deer feeding in the field with my exit, I'll go out through the woods on my exit. So I'll have a different entry than exit. And on a morning, it'd be the same deal. I'd come in through the woods because the deer are out in the fields, and then I would exit out through the field. So entries and exits are pretty important. And when I'm hunting corn, a lot of times when I want it, let's say I've got a tree that's on the edge of a cornfield and it's on private, so I have access to the cornfield. I'll go in prior to season, and if the corn rows are going this way and my tree's back here and I got to walk perpendicular to the corn rows, I'll actually take the corn, I'll make a straight beeline to the tree through the corn, and I'll knock the corn stalks down, 2 corn stalks down 45 degrees. I don't knock it down where the farmers are going to lose their corn, but I knock it down to the side so I've got a nice clear entry route that I can go quietly to my tree through the corn.
Yeah, that's got to make it nice.
Yeah, it's a very time. It takes about to go 150 yards through a cornfield, 200 yards. It'll take a couple hours.
Yeah.
It's time consuming, but it makes it nice because you can get in there nice and quietly. And it's kind of interesting because if a lot of times you're walking through there for an evening hunt, you're walking through that corn, and you're still going kind of slow and quietly, and you look down the rows because you just want to see if anything's bedded, and you'll see a doe bedded down there 20 yards, or a fawn or a 4-point or something. It's kind of neat.
Yeah. Well, John, I think we've covered a ton of topics, and we did an awesome podcast there. So, and we've gone 2 hours. So,
oh wow,
I think we'll end it here, and we'll just remind everybody that you can come see John at Huntstock this year. He'll be doing seminars, he'll have his books there, and we'll be hanging out, having fun the whole weekend. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, and looking forward to reading your books. And I think it's going to be an awesome year this year at Huntstock. So
I'm working on my audio books right now, and boy, what a painstaking thing that is. I'm doing the narration myself.
Yeah, how many takes do you have to do?
I'd say 50% of them I do one take, and then maybe 30% I do 2 takes, and 20% I do 3 takes. Because when you've written something that long ago, 18 months, 12 months ago.
Yeah.
You don't remember where to put your emphasis when you're reading. So, I'll read something and you're trying to look ahead while you're reading and know where to emphasize everything, but it doesn't always go that way. So you'll read something, then you'll have to scratch that. And then now that you've read it, you know where to emphasize the words. And then you got to go back and edit it. So I'm doing, this is a 200,000 word book. Okay. That's a lot. Like if you if you read an article in Bow Hunter or Deer and Deer Hunting or something like that, those articles are usually 1,800 to 2,000 words. This is 200,000 words in these 3 books combined. So that's a whole lot of reading, and then you got to go back and edit it. And I'm doing it sometimes 2 sentences at a time. I try to do it a paragraph at a time, but it took me a month to do the first book. I've got 1 chapter done in book number.
Are you recording it all there at your house?
Yeah, I'm doing it right here. I've got a laptop here. I've got a Audacity recording studio thing here on the side, and so I'm reading it off the desktop and recording it onto my laptop and on the Audacity. Yeah.
And then does the publisher like listen to it and say, "Oh, redo that," or you're just listening to it and say, "I want to do another take"?
I'm the publisher, so
You
it's all
you
up to me.
oh, you self-publish this one?
Yeah, I self-publish this.
Yep.
And
Oh,
these
cool.
books are self-published, so there
Yep.
might be some grammatical errors. Because the other books, man, the publishing company that did it, there wasn't a grammatical error in any of the other 3 books. But this one, I've noticed as I'm reading it, doing the audio, there is some grammatical errors.
No, that's all right.
It's
You
still
can't.
cool. I'm dealing with deer hunters, and
Yeah.
it's not like I'm doing an audio book of a mystery novel or something like that where everything's got to be perfect and you're excited and stuff. I'm emphasizing everything, and if everything's not perfect, a deer hunter doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, exactly. Unless it's
Not
scent
the
control.
content.
Unless it's scent control, then it's got to be perfect.
The scent, scent control doesn't have to be perfect. Once the information I put out there on scent control is perfect. Okay. Once you get the scent control regimen down, over time, you'll find where there's little gaps that you can skip. But I always want somebody to do it perfectly at first so that they gain confidence in it. And then over time, they will learn what they can skip and don't have to do.
Yeah, I thought it was actually interesting too at the end of our conversation with Joe Donito the other day, and he was asking a lot about scent control because as a tracker, it's the wind is going to go where it's going to go, and you're following the deer anyway. But he was asking you about it, and yeah, for those times where you get into that last 100 yards and you really got to take your time to get up to that bedded buck in a tracking scenario, and the wind is at your back.
Yeah.
That's where it's going to really change the game, I think, for trackers. So I think he's looking forward to reading at least that chapter.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
It's very in depth. It's very detail oriented. It talks about the technology. It's not just what do you do. I want to educate you on the technology as well. I want you to be out. I want a person be to be able to intelligently talk about it to other people. I want them to know how this stuff works and why it works, not just do this and it'll work.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's a ton of people who tried it and used an activated carbon garment, and then they're like, "Oh, that was bullshit. It didn't work." But it was because they didn't think about their backpack or their hat or whatever else they were wearing.
It's interesting you say that because at a lot of seminars I've done, I always ask people, "Okay, we're going to talk about scent lock here or scent control for a few minutes, activated carbon." And how many people in this room have used scent lock clothing? And typically 50% of the hands go up. A lot of people have tried it. Okay, how many of you guys that have used it have gotten winded? Probably 70% of those 50%, their hands went up. And I totally expect that. I say, okay, so that, that high of a percentage of you have got winded. Okay, how many of you wore the head cover? Because they watch TV and they think if they replicate what those TV actors do, that it's going to work where they hunt. But they're hunting pressured deer. They're hunting a lot smarter deer. So I say, how many of you guys wear a head cover? A lot of the hands did not go up. Very few hands go up on the head cover because TV guys didn't use them, so they didn't. Okay. So even the guys that wore head covers, I said, okay, now you guys that were wearing head covers, and I'm assuming you properly cared for it and properly stored it and were properly using it. I say, how many of you guys use a backpack? All the hands go up. Okay, how many of you guys wash your backpacks regularly, every half a dozen hunts in scent-free detergent and then store that in an airtight container so it's not collecting human odors? None of the hands go up.
Yep.
And I say, okay, there's your answer right there. I don't care what you do with your scent lock. It's not a magic bullet. It doesn't, you have to do everything correct if you want to not worry about wind at all. So that backpack has to be washed in scent-free detergent if you're using a generic backpack with no scent technology, no activated carbon in it. And it has to be kept in an airtight container so it's not absorbing any other odors outside of the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, but once you get the system down, I'm serious, it's super simple.
Yeah. You would think that scent log would have extensive, video or even just, teach that a little bit better to the general public. You would think they would do that.
Yeah, and they never have really since day one. I did a video for them 2 years ago, and they finally posted it on their website. You got to search for it, but I've got a care instruction video on ScentLock's website that they posted it within the last year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of the most important and first things that I would do, I think, if that was my technology. That's the most important thing, because you want everybody who buys it to believe in it and actually get the benefit out of it.
100% correct.
I don't know if they think maybe they think that would make people think it's more complicated than it is and then not want to buy it, so maybe they think their sales will go down if they put out a how-to on everything, because it might scare some guys away, like, oh, that's I don't want to wash my backpack.
Well, you got to look at the long-term ramifications of anything, just like Trump's looking at the long-term ramifications of tariffs. It's going to have short-term ramifications that are negative. The long-term is going to be phenomenal.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with ScentLock, yeah, if they did put how to, care for all that stuff correctly, and what to use in conjunction with it, yeah, it might scare some people off. So on the short term, it might cost them some sales. But on the long term, the people that did do it and did it correctly, they're going to get a whole lot of social media activity out of that. Man, this stuff works. I'm not getting winded. I know that deer would have winded me before.
Yeah.
I know that. I mean, I've had deer downwind me thousands and thousands of times without getting winded. And I hunted 35 years without scent lock, 33 years without scent lock. So I know what getting winded is. I hunted the wind.
Yeah.
So I know the difference. And now I have deer. I don't even pay any attention to wind. When a deer's coming in, wind direction doesn't even come into my mind. The only time I pay attention to wind direction is when I'm setting up a location at a primary scrape area, and I'm paying attention to wind direction because how a mature buck in a state like Michigan is going to come in and scent check it from downwind as opposed to coming into the destination primary scrape area during daylight.
Yeah, you're still paying attention to wind, thinking through the deer's eyes.
Right. Yes.
But not worried about getting winded. Yeah, but you're still thinking about how the deer is going to use the wind, right? And
100%.
in pretty much every scenario, you've got to be thinking about how he's going to be approaching with the wind.
Typically only at a scrape area.
Yeah?
That's about the only location I worry about wind direction is at a primary scrape area. Because primary scrape areas are always in a small open zone. There's going to be a small opening 5 to 10 yards or more. And mature bucks in where I'm at, they don't like stepping into that during daylight hours, into that vulnerable opening and working a scrape a lot of times. So they will circle downwind, and typically the wind in the fall is out of the northwest. So, if the scenario is correct and there's a good tree, I'll prep a tree on the southeast side of the scrape area, maybe 20, 25 yards from the physical scrapes.
Yep.
So I got the shot to the physical scrapes in case he does come into the scrapes. And then I'll make a shooting lane 25 yards to the southeast of my tree. So I've got a 50-yard swatch of a shooting lane where if a deer comes down and scent checks from downwind any place up to 50 yards, I've got that shot opportunity.
And that's a shot opportunity that anybody who is playing the wind just wouldn't have. That buck would not be walking up that way, right? Because
100%. And then I try to hunt that when there is a northwest wind.
So a lot of the times then these bucks are approaching from behind you when you're in your saddle. So are you just slowly keeping an eye on him? Like what? How are you actually, if he's coming from right behind you, getting ready for your shot opportunity, and then when are you taking your shot?
Typically I'll move around the tree because I can walk on my ring of steps. I can quietly move around the tree, and I'll move around the tree. So
Are you high? Are you really high in your tree too?
it's pretty rare I'm under 25 feet.
Yeah.
Very rare I'm under 25 feet during rut phases. I like to be high enough and well out of their peripheral vision.
Yeah.
So I'll move around the tree. To give you a great example, in 2004, I was hunting in a primary scrape area, and it was in a transition zone between a couple bedding areas. And so I'm sitting here. I'm in the 6 o'clock. The tree's here. The scrapes are at 12 o'clock. Okay, that's typically the way I set up on any destination. The tree is going to be between me and the destination spot, 180 degrees on the opposite side. So I'm sitting here, and here's this buck, and it was I think it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, midday. He's coming up out of this bedding area to the north, and he's coming over the hill, and he's coming directly at these scrapes. So I'm thinking I'm going to get my shot. He's coming to the physical scrapes. He gets about 20 yards in this. He's in the security cover from the scrapes, and he turns and he goes east. And I've got a shooting lane over here to the east. And when I start to see that he's going to circle around to the downwind side, I moved around. I picked up my bow, hung it on my back. I got a bow holder on the back side of the tree. I hung it there. And then I moved around the tree to the 10 o'clock position. And by the time I got around there and lifted my bow, his ass was going through my shooting lane. So now I swung back around the tree, picked up my bow, swung back around, put it on this side. And now I moved my body over to the 4 o'clock position so I can see down this shooting lane to the southeast. Well, when he hit that southeast shooting lane, he turned and walked straight towards me. He walked right up to the tree. He was literally, if I would have spit, the spit would have fell on his head. He was right at the base of my tree. Now, I had stood on that spot when I got up in the tree, and I had my backpack laying on the ground. So obviously he didn't smell anything. So he stopped right at the base of my tree, and he did a lip curl to sniff the scrapes because the wind was out of the northwest. And once he did that lip curl, and he was happy that nothing of interest was there because a small 8-pointed came by and went through that scrape area earlier. And then I thought he was going to turn around and go to the bedding area behind me. Well, so as soon as he turned around and started going back down that shooting lane, I picked up my bow, and by the time I got around, he was already down the shooting lane and turned, and he's going back in the exact same direction he came in from. So I spun back around in my saddle, grabbed my bow, and then I moved back around the tree this way because I know he's going back through that other shooting lane to the east in the same spot he went through it first. So now I'm ready. And as soon as his chest got into that opening, man, I drew back and went, meh, and he stopped, and I shot him. That was he has 150 something inch 10-point. But he totally came in and shot. He totally came in and worked it from the downwind side.
Yeah, and you had a lot of movement around your tree, but you didn't pick that off because you're up high enough, right?
Yep, I'm up high enough, and it was a bigger tree, and there was a crotch there, so there was a lot of wood around me to block my profile too.
Yeah, and it's another thing for people who are new to hunting. Like, you're running all the scenarios through your head on where you think he's going to go, but once you saw that he wasn't going to that other bedding area, and he was going back the way he came. Yeah. You see his first couple steps, he's going to be right on that same exact trail. So you knew to get ready for that other shooting lane. Yeah, that's little things that you get with experience, I think.
Yeah, so you go around and prep for that shot, and it's like, I ain't gonna miss it this time.
Yeah. Well, great. All right. Well, that's a good spot to end it, John. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be in touch between now and Huntstock anyway.
Sounds good, Pat.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
All right.